I never thought I would come home from my business trip to find strangers loading my furniture into a moving truck, while my own mother directed them like she owned the place. But there I was, standing in my driveway at 3 in the afternoon, watching two burly men carry my grandmother's antique dining table toward a U-Haul. My front door stood wide open, and I could hear my father's voice echoing from inside, barking orders about being careful with the china cabinet. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my house keys. My heart pounded as I rushed toward my own front door, confusion and panic washing over me in waves. The moving truck blocked half my driveway, its metal ramp extended like a tongue, ready to swallow everything I owned. Workers in matching blue uniforms carried boxes labeled with my address, but none of this made any sense. "Mom." "What are you doing here?" I called out as I stepped through my doorway. The familiar warmth of my entryway felt violated, somehow foreign, with strangers trampling through it. Patricia looked up from a clipboard she was holding, her silver hair perfectly styled, as always wearing the navy cardigan I had bought her for Christmas last year. She barely glanced in my direction before returning her attention to the list in her hands. "Oh, Elisa, you're early," she said with the casual tone she might use to comment on the weather. "We thought your flight didn't land until 5:30. "Early for what? Why are there movers in my house?" I demanded, watching in horror as a worker emerged from my living room carrying the ceramic lamp my grandmother Helen had painted by hand. "Be extra careful with that piece," Patricia instructed the mover, completely ignoring my question. "It's quite valuable." My father, Harold, appeared from the kitchen, his gray mustache twitching the way it always did when he was agitated. He wore his usual weekend uniform of khaki pants and a polo shirt, but something in his expression looked different, harder. "Patricia, where do you want these kitchen items?" he asked, gesturing toward a box marked "Fragile" in my mother's neat handwriting. "Kitchen items. Those are my kitchen items." I stepped forward, reaching for the box, but Harold pulled it away. "Now hold on there, sweetheart," he said, using the condescending tone he had perfected during my teenage years. "We need to talk." "Talk about what? Why are you packing up my house?" My voice cracked with disbelief. I was gone for 4 days on a business conference. 4 days. Patricia finally set down her clipboard and turned to face me fully. Her blue eyes held none of the maternal warmth I remembered from childhood. Instead, they were cold, calculating. "Sit down, Elisa. We have something to explain." "I'll stand, thank you very much. In my own living room, which apparently you've decided to empty without asking me." Harold moved closer, positioning himself between me and the front door. "Your mother and I have been talking while you were away in Denver. We've made a decision about this house." "A decision about my house." The words came out sharper than I intended, but the absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. "We've decided you're giving this house to Gavin and Jessica." Patricia announced, her tone matter-of-fact, as if she was informing me about a dinner reservation. "They need it more than you do." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I grabbed the back of my sofa for support, feeling the familiar texture of the fabric I had saved for months to afford. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "Gavin and his wife need a place to raise their baby," Harold explained, crossing his arms over his chest. "You're single, you travel all the time for work. This house is wasted on you." "Wasted on me? I bought this house. I pay the mortgage. I've spent 3 years fixing it up." My voice rose with each word, echoing off the walls that I had painted myself last spring. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Details. What matters is family. Gavin needs help, and you're going to provide it." I stared at them both, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate joke. But the moving truck in my driveway was real. The boxes marked with my address were real. The strangers handling my possessions were undeniably real. "You can't just give away my house," I protested. "That's not how property ownership works. That's not how anything works." "We're not giving it away," Harold replied with irritating patience. "You are, as a gift to your brother." "I never agreed to any such thing." "Well, you're agreeing now," Patricia said, picking up her clipboard again. The movers are here. Gavin is expecting to move in this weekend, and Jessica is due in 3 months. Everything is already arranged. My mind reeled as I tried to process what they were telling me. You arranged to steal my house. Don't be dramatic, dear. Nobody's stealing anything. Family helps family. That's how we raised you. A mover appeared in the archway leading to my bedroom carrying a box labeled Personal Photos. Inside that box were irreplaceable pictures of my grandmother Helen, vacation memories, college graduation photos. My entire history reduced to cardboard containers. "Stop," I said, rushing toward the mover. "Put that down. All of you stop moving my things." Harold stepped into my path, his expression growing stern. "Elisa, you need to calm down and think about what's best for the family." "What's best for the family? What about what's best for me? What about asking me before you broke into my house and started stealing everything I own?" "We didn't break in," Patricia said with a sniff. "We have keys." "Keys I gave you for emergencies, not for you to rob me blind." "Rob you? How dare you accuse us of robbery?" Harold's face flushed red. "We're your parents. We changed your diapers, paid for your education, supported you through college. And this is the thanks we get." "I paid my own way through college with student loans. I'm still paying off." "That's not the point," Patricia interjected. "The point is, Gavin needs this house. His wife is pregnant, they're struggling financially, and you have the means to help them." "Then why didn't anyone ask me? Why didn't Gavin call and explain the situation? Why are you here with movers packing up my life without my permission?" Harold exchanged a look with Patricia, and I caught something passing between them. Annoyance. Impatience. "Because we knew you'd say no," he admitted. "You've always been selfish, Elisa. Even as a child, everything had to be about you." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Selfish. I'm selfish for wanting to keep the house I work 60 hours a week to afford. "Yes." Patricia's voice rose for the first time. "Yes, you are. Gavin has a wife and a baby on the way. What do you have a career that keeps you traveling constantly and an empty house you barely live in anyway?" Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "This house isn't empty. It's my home. I love this house. Grandma Helen left it to me specifically." "Your grandmother is dead," Harold said bluntly. "She doesn't care what happens to it now, but your brother is very much alive and he needs help." The casual dismissal of Helen's memory made my chest tight with rage. My grandmother had been the only family member who truly understood me, who supported my dreams without conditions or criticism. Grandma Helen left this house to me because she wanted me to have it. She knew how much it meant to me. "She left it to you because she was old and sentimental," Patricia replied. "If she had known about Gavin's situation, she would have made different arrangements." A mover approached Patricia with a question about the china cabinet, and she turned away to direct him. Harold remained positioned near the door, watching me with a mixture of disappointment and determination. "This is insane," I whispered more to myself than to them. "This is absolutely insane." "What's insane is refusing to help your own brother," Harold said. "We raised you better than this, Elisa. At least we thought we did. You raised me to work hard for what I want. You raised me to be independent. You raised me to stand up for myself. Well, I'm standing up for myself now. By being selfish and cruel to your pregnant sister-in-law? By refusing to let you steal my house?" Patricia returned to our conversation, having finished with the mover. "It's not stealing if you give it willingly, which you will." "No, I won't." "Oh, yes, you will," Harold said, stepping closer. "Because if you don't, you'll tear this family apart. Is that what you want? Do you want to be responsible for destroying our family?" "I'm not destroying anything. You're the ones who broke into my house." "We're trying to help our son provide for his family," Patricia said firmly. "Something any decent person would support." The word decent hung in the air like an accusation. They were questioning my character, my values, my worth as a human being, all because I refused to hand over the most important thing I owned. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" Harold raised his eyebrows. Get out of my house. All of you. Stop the movers, put everything back where you found it, and leave." "That's not happening," Patricia said with a laugh that held no humor. "The truck is half loaded, Gavin is expecting to move in this weekend, and you're going to cooperate." "Watch me not cooperate." I pulled out my cell phone with shaking hands, my fingers fumbling as I tried to dial. "Who are you calling?" Harold demanded. "The police. You're trespassing, you're stealing my property, and I want you arrested." Harold stepped forward and tried to grab my phone. "Don't you dare call the police on your own parents." I jerked away from him, holding the phone to my chest. "Then get out of my house and stop stealing my things." "Nobody's stealing anything," Patricia shouted. "We're trying to help you do the right thing." "The right thing is asking for help, not taking what doesn't belong to you." "Everything we've given you belongs to us," Harold said, his voice turning dangerous. "We paid for your childhood, your food, your clothes, your school supplies. You owe us." "I owe you for doing the basic job of parenting, for 18 years of sacrifice. That was your choice. Nobody forced you to have children." The conversation was spiraling out of control emotions, escalating beyond reason. But reason had already left the building the moment I found strangers packing up my life. "You know what, fine. Call the police," Patricia said with a dismissive wave. "When they get here, we'll explain that we're helping our ungrateful daughter do something decent for her brother. We'll see who they believe. You'll see who they arrest for breaking and entering. With what evidence we have keys? You gave us keys. For emergencies." "This is an emergency. Gavin needs a place to live." I stared at both of them, wondering when my parents had become strangers. When had they decided that my needs, my property, my life mattered less than my brother's convenience? "I'm calling 911, I announced, beginning to dial. "Go ahead," Harold said coldly. "Nobody asked for your permission anyway." The words, "Nobody asked for your permission," echoed in my mind as I pressed the call button. My own father had just told me that my opinion about my own house didn't matter. The casualness of it, the complete dismissal of my autonomy, left me breathless with shock. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "I need police at my home immediately. My parents have broken into my house with movers and are stealing my belongings." The words sounded surreal even as I spoke them. "Are you in immediate physical danger, ma'am?" I looked at Harold, who was glaring at me with undisguised anger, and Patricia, who had returned to directing the movers as if nothing unusual was happening. "No, but they're actively removing my property from my home without permission." "What's your address?" I provided my address on Maple Street along with my contact information. The dispatcher assured me officers would arrive within 15 minutes and advised me to remain calm and avoid confrontation until they arrived. Easier said than done. Harold had overheard enough of my conversation to understand what was happening. "You actually called the police on us, your own parents. You actually broke into my house and started stealing everything I own, my own parents." Patricia looked up from her clipboard with annoyance. "This is ridiculous, Elisa. Cancel that call right now." "Absolutely not." "Fine. When the police arrive, we'll explain the situation. They'll understand that families help each other." A mover emerged from my bedroom carrying another box, this one labeled "Jewelry and Valuables." I recognized my grandmother's handwriting on several pieces inside items Helen had specifically left to me in her will. "Stop," I called to the mover. "Please just stop for a moment." The young man looked confused, glancing between me and Patricia. "Ma'am, who should I listen to?" "Me," Patricia said firmly. "I hired you, I'm paying you, and you follow my instructions." "This is my house," I told the mover. "These are my belongings. Please set that box down." The poor worker looked increasingly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding around him. "Maybe I should check with my supervisor." "Your supervisor is outside with the truck," Patricia replied. "Keep loading. We're on a schedule." I stepped closer to the mover, trying to keep my voice gentle but firm. "Sir, I understand you're just doing your job, but there's been a misunderstanding. These items belong to me, and I haven't authorized this move. The mover hesitated, clearly sensing something was wrong but unsure how to proceed. "Lady, I don't want to get in the middle of a family thing, you know." "You're not in the middle of anything," Harold interjected. "Just do what you're paid to do." Before anyone could respond, I heard car doors slamming outside. Through my front window, I could see 2 police cruisers pulling into my driveway behind the moving truck. "Well," Patricia said with false cheerfulness, "I suppose we're about to sort this out." Officer Martinez was the first through my door, a tall woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that immediately assessed the situation. Behind her came Officer Thompson, younger and broader, carrying a tablet for taking notes. "Good afternoon," Officer Martinez said, her voice carrying natural authority. "We received a call about a theft in progress at this address." "That's correct," I said, stepping forward. "I'm Elisa, and this is my house. I came home from a business trip to find my parents here with movers taking my belongings without my permission." Officer Martinez looked around the room, taking in the boxes, the moving equipment, and the obvious family tension. "And you are?" she asked Patricia. "Patricia Morrison, Elisa's mother. There seems to be some confusion here. We're helping our son move into this house. It's a family arrangement." "A family arrangement that I never agreed to," I interjected. Officer Thompson was already taking notes. "Ma'am, do you have documentation showing you own this property?" "Yes, absolutely. I can get my deed, my mortgage papers, everything." I started toward my home office, then stopped. "Actually, I'm not sure where they are right now. Everything's been packed up." "The deed and mortgage papers are in the kitchen," Patricia said helpfully, in the box marked "Important Documents." Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "You've packed up legal documents without the homeowner's permission." "She's our daughter. We were organizing everything for the move." "Ma'am," Officer Martinez addressed me directly. "Can you verify that you own this property and that you didn't authorize this move?" "Yes, I can verify both those things. I bought this house 3 years ago with a mortgage from First National Bank. I never gave anyone permission to move my belongings or transfer my property." Officer Thompson spoke to the moving crew leader, a stocky man named Jake, who'd been standing awkwardly near the truck during the entire confrontation. "Sir, who hired your company for this job?" Jake pulled out a work order from his clipboard. "This lady here," he said, pointing to Patricia, "Patricia Morrison. She called our office 3 days ago and scheduled the job, paid in cash when we arrived this morning." 3 days ago?" I stared at Patricia in disbelief. "You scheduled this 3 days ago while I was still in Denver." Patricia's composure slipped slightly. "We wanted to have everything ready for when you got home." "Ready for what? Ready to rob me?" Officer Martinez held up a hand to quiet the growing argument. "Let's take this step by step. Mrs. Morrison, do you have written authorization from the homeowner to remove these items?" "I don't need authorization. She's my daughter and we're helping family." "That's not how property law works, ma'am. Adult children own their property independently of their parents, regardless of family relationships." Harold spoke up for the first time since the officers arrived. "This is a civil matter between family members. Surely the police don't need to be involved." Officer Thompson looked up from his notes. "Breaking into someone's home and removing their property without permission isn't a civil matter, sir. That's criminal trespass and theft." "Breaking in." Patricia laughed, though it sounded forced. "We didn't break in. We have keys." "Keys that I gave you for emergencies only I clarified, not for you to enter my home and steal my belongings while I'm out of town." Officer Martinez addressed the movers. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to stop loading items until we sort this out. Please put down anything you're currently carrying and step outside." Jake nodded gratefully. "Yes, ma'am. Honestly, we were starting to feel uncomfortable with the whole situation." "Uncomfortable how?" Officer Thompson asked. "Well, usually when families are moving, everyone's on the same page, you know. But this lady," he gestured toward me, "seemed pretty shocked to see us. And then she started arguing with her folks about it being her stuff. Made us wonder if something wasn't right." "Something definitely isn't right," I confirmed. I had no idea any of this was happening until I came home 20 minutes ago." Officer Martinez turned back to Patricia and Harold. "I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you." As they fumbled for their wallets, I noticed Patricia's hands were shaking slightly. Harold's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles bulging beneath his skin. "Officer Martinez," I said, "there's something else you should know. When I came home and confronted them about this, my father told me nobody asked for your permission. They're not even pretending this was done with my consent." "Is that accurate, Mr. Morrison?" Officer Thompson asked Harold. Harold's mustache twitched. "What I said was that sometimes families have to make difficult decisions for the greater good." "That's not what you said, and you know it," I replied. Officer Martinez examined their identification, then handed it back. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to verify the homeowner's identity and property ownership. Then we're going to determine whether any crimes have been committed." "Crimes?" Patricia's voice pitched higher. "We're trying to help our pregnant daughter-in-law." "By stealing your other daughter's house?" Officer Thompson asked dryly. The situation was escalating beyond what I had imagined when I first called 911. Part of me felt guilty for involving the police in what Patricia kept calling a family matter. But another part of me, the part that had watched strangers carry away my grandmother's table, felt completely justified. "Ma'am." Officer Martinez addressed me. "I'm going to need you to provide documentation of your ownership while Officer Thompson speaks with the moving company supervisor." I retrieved my mortgage documents and deed from the box in the kitchen, my hands still trembling from adrenaline. As I handed them to Officer Martinez, I noticed Patricia watching me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't maternal concern or even anger. It was calculation, as if she was trying to figure out her next move. That look, more than anything else that had happened, convinced me that calling the police had been the right decision. Officer Martinez examined my documents carefully. "These appear to be in order. The property is clearly titled to Elisa Morrison, and there's no indication of any other authorized occupants or transfer agreements." "There wouldn't be," I said, "because I never agreed to any of this." Jake, the moving company supervisor, approached Officer Thompson with his own paperwork. "Officer, here's our work order. Like I said, Mrs. Patricia Morrison called Wednesday morning and scheduled a full house pack and move for today. She specified that everything needed to be out by evening because the new tenants were moving in tomorrow morning." "New tenants?" I stared at Patricia. "You told someone they could move in tomorrow." Patricia's face had gone pale. "Gavin and Jessica need to be out of their apartment by the weekend." "So you promised them my house without asking me, scheduled movers without telling me, and planned to have me effectively evicted from my own home." Before Patricia could answer, Officer Martinez stepped forward with a grave expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, based on the evidence we've gathered here today, I'm placing you both under arrest for criminal trespass, attempted theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The words hung in the air like a verdict. I watched my parents' faces transform from defiance to shock to fear in the span of seconds. Harold found his voice first. "Arrest, you're arresting us for helping our family." "I'm arresting you for entering someone else's property without permission and attempting to steal their belongings," Officer Martinez replied as she reached for her handcuffs. The metallic click of handcuffs snapping closed seemed to echo through my entire house. I had never heard that sound in person before, never imagined I would hear it applied to my own parents. Officer Martinez moved with practiced efficiency, securing Patricia's wrists behind her back while reciting the Miranda warning in a calm, professional tone. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Patricia's perfectly styled silver hair was beginning to come undone wisps, escaping from her usual neat arrangement. Her navy cardigan had twisted awkwardly with her arms behind her back, making her look smaller, somehow more fragile than I had ever seen her. "This is insane," she protested, her voice cracking with disbelief. "We're her parents. You can't arrest us for trying to help our family." Officer Thompson was already moving toward Harold with a second set of handcuffs. My father backed away instinctively, his face flushing red with indignation. "Sir, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," Officer Thompson said firmly. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "I will not!" Harold's voice boomed through the room. "This is absolutely ridiculous, Elisa. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding." I stood frozen watching this surreal scene unfold in my own living room. Part of me wanted to stop it, wanted to tell the officers that maybe we could work something out as a family, but the larger part of me, the part that had just watched my parents systematically pack up my entire life without my knowledge or consent, remained silent. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again," Officer Thompson warned, his hand moving toward his utility belt. Harold looked at me with desperate eyes. "Elisa, please, think about what you're doing. Think about Gavin and Jessica. Think about your nephew or niece who hasn't even been born yet. Are you really going to tear apart this family over a house?" "I'm not tearing apart anything," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You did that when you broke into my home and tried to steal everything I own." With obvious reluctance, Harold finally turned around and allowed Officer Thompson to handcuff him. The sight of my father in restraints was almost too surreal to process. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life," Harold muttered as the cuffs clicked into place. "Mark my words, Elisa. You'll regret destroying your family over material possessions." Officer Martinez was searching Patricia's purse, following standard arrest procedures. As she emptied the contents onto my coffee table, something caught her attention. "Officer Thompson, take a look at this." She held up a folded piece of paper covered in Patricia's neat handwriting. As Officer Martinez unfolded it, I could see it was a detailed list of some kind. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez addressed me, "is this your mother's handwriting?" I moved closer to examine the paper. Yes, that's definitely her writing. Officer Martinez began reading aloud. "Antique dining table, estimated value $800. China cabinet with full set, estimated value $1,200. Helen's jewelry collection, estimated value $1,500. Living room furniture set, estimated value $2,000. My mouth fell open as the implications became clear. That's an inventory of my belongings, with estimated values. Officer Thompson whistled low under his breath. "This shows premeditation. You don't just happen to have a detailed list of someone else's property values in your purse." Patricia's face had gone completely white. "I was just organizing. I wanted to make sure nothing got damaged during the move." "Ma'am, this list includes estimated monetary values," Officer Martinez pointed out. "That suggests intent to liquidate or sell these items, not just to move them carefully." My legs felt weak. I sank down onto my sofa, staring at the list of my possessions written in my mother's familiar handwriting. "How long have you been planning this?" Patricia refused to meet my eyes. "It's not what it looks like. It looks like you've been cataloging my belongings and researching their values," I said, my voice rising. "It looks like you've been planning to steal my house and everything in it." Officer Martinez continued examining the contents of Patricia's purse. She pulled out a small zippered pouch and opened it to reveal several keys. "Are these your house keys, ma'am?" she asked me. I recognized them immediately. "Yes, those are the spare keys I gave them to check on my plants when I travel." "When did you last give them access to your home?" Officer Thompson asked, making notes. "About 6 months ago, when I went to the trade conference in Seattle. I asked them to water my plants and bring in the mail." Officer Martinez held up one of the keys, examining it closely. "This key looks newer than the others, recently cut." Harold shifted uncomfortably in his restraints. "We had an extra one made in case of emergencies." "Emergencies like breaking into her house while she's out of town?" Officer Thompson asked skeptically. "We didn't break in. She gave us keys." "She gave you one key 6 months ago for a specific purpose," Officer Martinez corrected. "Making additional copies without permission and using them to enter her home without authorization still constitutes criminal trespass." The moving crew stood in an awkward cluster near my front door, clearly wanting to leave, but unsure if they were free to go. Jake approached Officer Thompson hesitantly. "Officer, are we done here? Because honestly, we don't want any part of this family drama." "Actually, sir, I need to ask you a few more questions," Officer Thompson replied. "You said Mrs. Morrison paid in cash when you arrived this morning." Jake nodded. "Yeah, she had the exact amount ready. Told us she wanted to make sure the job got done quickly and efficiently." "How much was the total cost?" Jake consulted his paperwork. $1,200 for a full pack and move. That's a lot of cash to have on hand for most people. Officer Martinez looked at Patricia sharply. "Where did you get $1,200 in cash, Mrs. Morrison?" Patricia's silence stretched uncomfortably long. Harold answered for her. "We withdrew it from our savings account yesterday." "Yesterday?" I felt sick. "You withdrew cash yesterday to pay for stealing my house." "We weren't stealing anything." Patricia finally exploded, her composure completely shattered. "We were trying to help Gavin. He needs this house more than you do. You're never even here. You travel constantly for work. You don't have a family. You don't need a 4-bedroom house all to yourself." "Whether I need it or not isn't your decision to make," I shot back. "It's my house. I bought it. I pay for it. I live in it." "You exist in it," Patricia corrected bitterly. "There's a difference between living somewhere and just existing there. This house is wasted on you." Officer Martinez stepped between us before the argument could escalate further. "Mrs. Morrison, you have the right to remain silent. I'd suggest you exercise that right." But Patricia was beyond listening to advice. The mask of maternal concern had completely fallen away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You want to know the truth, Elisa Fine. Here's the truth. Gavin called us 3 weeks ago crying about how he and Jessica were going to be homeless with a baby on the way. He begged us to help them figure something out. And you know what we realized? You have everything you could possibly need and you don't appreciate any of it." 3 weeks ago. The timeline was becoming clearer. "You've been planning this for 3 weeks. We've been trying to figure out how to help our son for 3 weeks, and the obvious solution was right in front of us. You have a house you barely use, and Gavin has a family that desperately needs one." Harold nodded emphatically despite the handcuffs. "We raised you to share Elisa. We raised you to put family first. But somewhere along the way, you became selfish and greedy. Selfish and greedy for wanting to keep my own house. Selfish and greedy for refusing to help your brother when you have the means to solve all his problems." Officer Thompson looked up from his notes. "Mr. Morrison, are you admitting that this was planned in advance?" Harold seemed to realize he had said too much. "I'm admitting that we wanted to help our son. By stealing your daughter's property. By convincing her to do the right thing." "Convincing?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call breaking into my house with movers while I'm out of town? That's your idea of convincing me." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. "We knew you'd say no if we asked. You've always been stubborn and selfish. Even as a child, you never wanted to share anything." "I was willing to share my toys as a child. I'm not willing to share my house as an adult because houses aren't toys, Mother. They're homes. They're security. They're the result of years of hard work and financial sacrifice." Officer Martinez had heard enough. "Ma'am, Mr. Morrison, you're both going to need to come with us now." As the officers began escorting my parents toward the door, Patricia turned back to face me one last time. Her expression was a mixture of rage, disappointment, and something that looked almost like hatred. "This isn't over, Elisa," she said quietly. "Gavin will never forgive you for this. Jessica will never forgive you. You're destroying your own family over material possessions, and one day you'll realize what a terrible mistake you've made." "The only terrible mistake here was trusting you with keys to my house," I replied. Harold was shaking his head sadly as Officer Thompson guided him through the doorway. "We tried to raise you better than this. We really did." As I watched the police cars pull away with my parents in the back seats, the moving crew supervisor approached me apologetically. Ma'am, I'm really sorry about all this. We had no idea there was family drama involved. We thought it was just a regular move. It's not your fault, I assured him. You were hired to do a job and you did it professionally. What do you want us to do with the stuff we already loaded? Should we bring it back in? I looked at the half-empty truck, seeing my grandmother's dining table secured with moving straps alongside boxes of my personal belongings. The violation of seeing my life packed away like unwanted storage made my chest tight with anger. Yes, please bring everything back inside, and thank you for being understanding about this situation. As the movers began the process of returning my belongings to my house, I called my supervisor to let her know I might need a personal day tomorrow to deal with the legal aftermath of what had just happened. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across my living room floor. In the space of a few hours, my relationship with my parents had been fundamentally altered, possibly beyond repair. But as I watched my grandmother's table being carefully carried back through my front door, I knew I had made the right choice. Some boundaries were too important to cross even for family, especially for family. I was directing the movers on where to replace my grandmother's china cabinet when I heard another car door slam in my driveway. Through the front window, I could see a familiar blue Honda Civic parked behind one of the moving trucks. My heart sank as I recognized my brother Gavin climbing out of the driver's seat. Gavin looked exactly as I remembered from our last awkward family dinner 6 months ago, tall and lean with sandy brown hair that always seemed to need a trim, wearing his usual uniform of jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt. But something about his posture seemed different now, more slouched, as if he was carrying invisible weight on his shoulders. The passenger door opened and Jessica emerged slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back in the universal gesture of pregnancy discomfort. She wore a flowing maternity dress in pale yellow, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Even from a distance, I could see her face was blotchy and red, as if she had been crying. "Oh no," I muttered under my breath. The last thing I needed right now was more family drama, especially with Jessica in her current condition. Jake, the moving supervisor, looked up from the inventory list he was updating. "More family members." "My brother and his pregnant wife," I explained. "They probably heard about the arrests. Want me to have my guys work faster, get everything back inside before they complicate things?" I considered this option but realized there was no point in avoiding the inevitable confrontation. "No, take your time and do it right. I'll deal with them." Gavin reached my front door first, his expression a mixture of confusion and panic. Jessica followed more slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. "Elisa, what the hell is going on?" Gavin demanded, stepping around a mover who was carrying one of my kitchen chairs. "Mom called me from the police station crying and saying you had them arrested. Please tell me that's not true." I took a deep breath, preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "It's true, Gavin. They broke into my house while I was out of town and tried to steal everything I own." "Steal everything." Jessica's voice was higher than usual, strained with emotion. "Elisa, they were trying to help us. We're about to be homeless." "I'm sorry to hear about your housing situation, but that doesn't give anyone the right to steal my house." Gavin ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he had developed in college. "Nobody was trying to steal your house. Mom and Dad said you had agreed to let us move in temporarily until we got back on our feet." "I never agreed to any such thing. In fact, I had no idea any of this was happening until I came home an hour ago to find strangers packing up my belongings." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "But Mom Patricia said you were excited about helping us with the baby. She said you thought it would be nice for us all to be closer as a family." The manipulation in that statement was breathtaking. "Jessica, I haven't spoken to Mom in 3 weeks. How could she know what I was excited about?" "Because she knows you," Gavin protested. "She knows you're a good person who cares about family." I gestured around my disrupted living room. "Does this look like something a good person who cares about family would do, breaking into my house, stealing my belongings, having me effectively evicted from my own home?" "They weren't evicting you." Jessica wiped her eyes with a tissue. "They said you could stay in the guest bedroom until you found somewhere smaller and more appropriate for a single person." The casual assumption that I should be grateful for permission to stay in my own guest bedroom left me speechless for a moment. Jessica, this is my house. I bought it. I pay the mortgage. I don't need permission to stay anywhere in it, and I certainly don't need to find somewhere more appropriate because other people have decided my home is wasted on me. Gavin sat down heavily on my sofa, putting his head in his hands. This is a nightmare. We were supposed to move in tomorrow morning. Our lease is up, our landlord already has new tenants lined up, and now we have nowhere to go. Despite everything that had happened, I felt a stab of sympathy for my brother. Whatever else was going on, he clearly believed that our parents had worked out some kind of legitimate arrangement. Gavin helped me understand something. When did Mom and Dad first approach you about using my house? He looked up, his brown eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. About 3 weeks ago, right after we got our eviction notice, Mom called and said she had an idea that might solve all our problems. And what exactly did she tell you? She said she was going to talk to you about letting us stay here temporarily, just until I could get back on my feet financially and we could find our own place. Did you ever think to call me yourself to discuss the situation directly? Gavin's face flushed with embarrassment. I wanted to, but Mom said she would handle it. She said you were really busy with work and it would be better coming from her. Jessica moved to sit beside Gavin, her movements slow and careful. Your parents made it sound like you were thrilled about the idea. They said you missed having family around and that you thought it would be good for the baby to grow up close to you. The picture was becoming clearer. Patricia and Harold had manipulated both sides of this situation, telling me nothing while telling Gavin and Jessica that everything was arranged. Jessica, I need you to understand something. I have never been contacted about any of this. Not a phone call, not a text message, not an email. Nothing. The first I heard about any housing arrangement was when I walked through my front door an hour ago to find strangers loading my furniture into a truck. Gavin stared at me in disbelief. That's impossible. Mom specifically told us you had agreed to everything. She showed us pictures of which room would be the nursery. She showed you pictures of my house? Yeah, she took photos when she was here watering your plants last month. She said you had given her a tour and shown her how the upstairs bedrooms would be perfect for a growing family. I felt sick. Patricia had used her legitimate access to my house to plan this entire scheme, photographing my rooms and presenting them to Gavin and Jessica as if I had personally offered them a home. Gavin, I never offered you anything. I didn't know you were having housing problems. I didn't know Jessica was pregnant until right now. Jessica's tears started flowing again. But we told Patricia weeks ago about the pregnancy. We called specifically to share the good news with the family. When you called to share the news, who did you speak to? Your parents, Gavin replied. We couldn't reach you directly because you were traveling for work, so we called Mom and Dad to ask them to pass along the message. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. My parents had been intercepting family communication, controlling the flow of information between Gavin and me. They never told me about the pregnancy, I said quietly. Congratulations, by the way. I know this isn't how you wanted me to find out. Jessica sobbed harder. This is all wrong. Everything is going wrong. We don't have anywhere to go. We don't have any money saved up, and now the baby won't have a stable home. Despite my anger at being manipulated, I couldn't help but feel sorry for Jessica. She was clearly stressed and frightened about her situation. Jessica, how far along are you? 6 months. The baby is due in January. And when did you find out about the housing problems? Gavin answered for her. Last month. I lost my job at the warehouse in September, and we fell behind on rent. Our landlord filed eviction papers 3 weeks ago. You lost your job, Mom and Dad told the police that you were employed. Gavin looked confused. What? No. I've been out of work for 2 months. That's why we're in this mess. I've been applying everywhere, but the job market is really tough right now. More lies from Patricia and Harold. They had been misrepresenting Gavin's situation to make their theft seem more justified. What happened at your job? Budget cuts. They laid off 12 people, and I was one of the newest hires, so I was first to go. I wasn't fired for cause or anything. I just didn't have enough seniority. This was completely different from what my parents had told me earlier. They had implied that Gavin was irresponsible and needed to be bailed out of problems of his own making. Have you applied for unemployment benefits? Yeah, but it's not enough to cover rent plus all the medical bills for the pregnancy. Jessica had some complications earlier that required expensive tests. Jessica nodded, wiping her nose. I had severe morning sickness that led to dehydration. I had to go to the emergency room twice, and even with insurance, the bills are overwhelming. I was starting to understand how desperate their situation really was, but that still didn't justify what my parents had done. I'm sorry you're both going through this, I said sincerely. I wish Mom and Dad had told me what was happening so we could have discussed options together as adults. What kind of options? Gavin asked hopefully. I don't know. Maybe temporary financial assistance help with job searching references for rental applications. There might have been ways I could help that didn't involve you moving into my house. Jessica looked up with renewed hope. Could we still discuss those options even after everything that's happened? Before I could answer, one of the movers approached with a question about where to place a particular box. As I directed him, I noticed Gavin and Jessica exchanging meaningful looks. When the mover left, Gavin leaned forward earnestly. Elisa, I know this whole situation is completely messed up. I know Mom and Dad handled everything wrong, but could you please consider still helping us? We're family, we're desperate, and Jessica is pregnant. Gavin, I understand you're in a difficult position, but you have to see this from my perspective too. I came home to find my house being stolen. Your housing crisis doesn't justify theft. But we didn't know it was theft, Jessica protested. We thought you had agreed. We thought you wanted to help. I know you didn't know, but the fact remains that Mom and Dad committed serious crimes today. They broke into my house, they tried to steal my belongings, and they lied to everyone involved. Gavin buried his face in his hands again. This is insane. How did everything get so messed up? It got messed up when Mom and Dad decided to solve your problems by stealing my house instead of asking for help like normal people. But asking for help is so humiliating, Jessica said quietly. We're adults. We should be able to take care of ourselves. Everyone needs help sometimes. There's no shame in that. But there is shame in theft. Gavin stood up and began pacing around my living room. Okay, so what happens now? Are you going to press charges against Mom and Dad? Are you going to let them go to jail over this? I don't know yet. I need time to process everything that's happened. But there are parents, Jessica exclaimed. Think about how this will affect the whole family. I'm thinking about the family. I'm thinking about how they violated my trust, invaded my privacy, and attempted to steal the most important thing I own. Gavin stopped pacing and faced me directly. Elisa, I'm begging you. Please don't let this destroy our family. Drop the charges, work something out with Mom and Dad, and let's figure out a solution that works for everyone. The pressure was mounting from all sides. I could see the desperation in both their faces, could hear the genuine fear in their voices. But I could also remember the cold calculation in Patricia's eyes as she directed movers to steal my belongings. I need time to think, I said finally. This has been the worst day of my life, and I can't make major decisions while I'm still processing everything. How much time? Jessica asked anxiously. I don't know. A few days at least. Gavin nodded reluctantly. Okay, that's fair. But please just remember that we love you and we never wanted any of this to happen. As they prepared to leave, Jessica turned back with one final plea. Elisa, I know we're asking a lot, but this baby is your nephew or niece. They deserve to have a stable home and a loving family. Please don't let our child pay the price for their grandparents' mistakes. The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. As I watched them drive away, I couldn't shake the image of Jessica's tear-stained face or Gavin's obvious desperation. But I also couldn't shake the memory of finding strangers in my house packing up my life without my permission. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive quickly, even for family, especially for family. After Gavin and Jessica left, I stood in my living room surveying the chaos around me. Half-empty boxes were scattered across the floor, furniture had been moved from its usual places, and my entire sense of security felt shattered. The movers had finished returning most of my belongings, but everything felt different now, contaminated somehow by the violation of my privacy. I needed to understand exactly what my parents had done while they were in my house. The inventory list Officer Martinez had found in Patricia's purse suggested this theft had been planned in detail, but I suspected there was more evidence hidden somewhere in my home. My first stop was my home office, a small room off the main hallway where I kept important documents and handled my freelance graphic design work. As I pushed open the door, my stomach dropped. The room looked like someone had gone through it systematically. My filing cabinet stood open, folders pulled forward and clearly rummaged through. Papers that I normally kept in neat stacks were scattered across my desk. My computer had been moved, the monitor turned at an odd angle, as if someone had been looking behind it. But what made my blood run cold was what I found on my desk, a stack of my personal mail opened and sorted into piles. I picked up the first piece with trembling hands. It was my mortgage statement from last month, the envelope slit open, with what looked like a letter opener. Someone had highlighted my monthly payment amount in yellow marker and made notes in the margins in Harold's distinctive handwriting, current balance $127K, monthly payment $1,847. The next piece was my bank statement, also opened and annotated. Patricia had circled my savings account balance and written, "sufficient for down payment on smaller property," in her neat script. My credit card statements had been opened and examined with particular attention, paid to my travel expenses and dining purchases. Harold had written, "excessive spending on restaurants clearly wasteful," next to several entries. I felt nauseous as I realized my parents had been conducting a complete financial audit of my life without my knowledge or permission. They had violated every boundary of adult privacy, treating me like a child whose finances needed parental oversight. But it got worse. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I found a manila folder that didn't belong to me. Inside were printed emails between Patricia and someone named Rebecca Chen at Mountain View Realty, dated over the past 6 months. The first email from March showed Patricia inquiring about current market conditions for 4-bedroom homes in the Maple Street area. Rebecca had responded with a detailed market analysis showing that homes like mine were selling for between $250,000 and $300,000. As I read through the email chain, the scope of my parents' deception became clear. Patricia had been researching my property value for months, gathering information about comparable sales average time on market and projected appreciation rates. In May, she had asked Rebecca about the fastest way to sell inherited property and whether there were any family transfer options that might expedite the process. Rebecca had responded with information about quitclaim deeds, family gift transfers, and estate planning strategies. She had even provided contact information for lawyers who specialized in family property transfers. The most recent email, dated just 2 weeks ago, contained a draft listing description for my house. Patricia had written it as if she was preparing to sell the property immediately after gaining control of it. Charming 4-bedroom home in desirable neighborhood. Recently updated kitchen, hardwood floors throughout mature landscaping. Perfect for growing family. Motivated seller, quick closing, available. My hands shook as I read the listing price, $275,000. They hadn't just been planning to steal my house, they had been planning to sell it. I continued searching through the folder and found something even more disturbing: printed screenshots of my social media accounts. Patricia had been monitoring my Facebook posts, Instagram photos, and LinkedIn updates for months. She had documented every business trip I took, every photo I posted, of eating out alone, every check-in at hotels or conferences. Next to several photos, she had written comments like, "further evidence of wasteful lifestyle," and "clearly doesn't appreciate what she has." Most unsettling were her notes about my work schedule. She had tracked my travel patterns and identified the longest periods when I was away from home. The dates of my Denver conference trip were circled in red ink with optimal window for transition written beside them. My parents hadn't just stumbled into this scheme. They had been planning it methodically for months, studying my life like scientists preparing an experiment. At the very bottom of the folder, I found the most shocking document, yet a partially completed quitclaim, deed form. Someone had already filled in my name as the grantor and Gavin's name as the grantee. Only my signature was missing to make the transfer legal. The deed was dated for today, clearly intended to be completed after they had moved me out of my own house. I photographed every document with my phone, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and betrayal. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to help Gavin. This was a calculated, long-term plan to steal my property and sell it for profit. My phone rang, startling me out of my documentary process. The caller ID showed Detective Williams from the County Police Department. Ms. Morrison, this is Detective Williams. I'm handling your parents' case. I wanted to let you know that they've been processed and released on their own recognizance pending a court hearing next week. Released? They're already out. Yes, ma'am. The charges are serious, but neither of them has a criminal history, so the judge allowed them to post bail. However, there is a restraining order in place. They're not allowed to contact you or come within 500 feet of your property. I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Part of me was glad my parents weren't sitting in jail, but another part worried about what they might do now that they were free. Detective Williams, I've found some additional evidence that might be relevant to the case. What kind of evidence? I described the financial documents, the real estate emails, and the prepared quitclaim deed. Detective Williams listened with increasing interest. Ms. Morrison, what you're describing suggests this may have been a more sophisticated scheme than we initially realized. Would you be willing to come to the station tomorrow to provide copies of these documents? Absolutely. I've already photographed everything. Good. In the meantime, I'd recommend securing your home with new locks and considering a security system. If your parents had been planning this for months, they may have made additional preparations we haven't discovered yet. After hanging up with the detective, I called a locksmith and scheduled an emergency service call for that evening. Then I contacted a security company about having cameras and alarms installed. As I waited for the locksmith to arrive, I continued searching through my house for signs of my parents' invasion. In my bedroom, I found evidence that someone had been through my jewelry box. My grandmother, Helen's pieces, were still there, but they had been photographed and cataloged. I found a small notebook with detailed descriptions of each item and estimated values. Pearl necklace vintage 1940s, estimated value $800. Gold bracelet with sapphires, estimated value $200. Diamond ring Art Deco setting, estimated value $2,500. The meticulous documentation made me feel sick. They had been treating my most treasured possessions like inventory in a store, reducing my grandmother's memory to dollar signs on a page. In my kitchen, I discovered they had even cataloged my appliances and cookware. Patricia had made notes about which items were worth keeping and which were easily replaceable. The depth of their violation was staggering. They hadn't just entered my house. They had conducted a complete appraisal of everything I owned, planning not just to steal my property, but to liquidate every valuable item in it. When the locksmith arrived at 8 p.m., I had him change every lock on every door and window. I also had him install additional deadbolts and security chains. The process took 3 hours and cost me $600. But it was worth every penny to know that my parents could never again enter my house without permission. As I finally settled into bed that night, surrounded by boxes and displaced furniture, I realized that my relationship with my parents was probably irreparably damaged. The betrayal was too deep, the violation too complete. But more than that, I realized that Gavin and Jessica might not be the innocent victims they appeared to be. If my parents had been planning this for months, there was a good chance that my brother and sister-in-law knew more about the scheme than they had admitted. Tomorrow, I would start digging deeper into their stories. Tonight, I would try to sleep in a house that finally felt secure again, even if it no longer felt like home. The new locks were solid and strong, but they couldn't lock out the knowledge that my own family had been planning to destroy my life for their financial gain. That realization would take much longer to heal than any physical damage they had done to my property. I woke up the next morning feeling like I had been hit by a truck. Every muscle in my body ached from the stress and adrenaline of the previous day, and my mind kept replaying the image of my parents in handcuffs. Despite everything they had done, seeing them arrested in my living room had been one of the most surreal and painful experiences of my life. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, most from numbers I didn't recognize, but several from extended family members who had apparently heard about the arrests through the family gossip network. The messages ranged from supportive to accusatory. Elisa called me, Aunt Margaret. Can't believe you had your own parents arrested. Shame on you, Cousin Dave. Here if you need anything. Love you, Uncle Tom. Your mother is heartbroken. Fix this, Aunt Linda. I turned off my phone and made coffee, trying to clear my head enough to figure out my next steps. The detective had asked me to come to the station with the documents I had found, but first I wanted to understand more about the family history behind this situation. Something about my grandmother's will kept nagging at me. Patricia had seemed particularly bitter yesterday when I mentioned that Helen had specifically left the house to me. Her reaction suggested there might be more to that story than I knew. I decided to call Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, my grandmother's former neighbor and close friend. Eleanor was 86 years old, sharp as a tack, and had lived next door to my grandmother for 37 years. If anyone knew the full story of Helen's final years, it would be Eleanor. Eleanor answered on the second ring, her voice warm but concerned. Elisa, dear, I heard about the terrible business yesterday through the neighborhood grapevine. Are you all right? I'm okay, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Actually, I was hoping I could ask you some questions about Grandma Helen's final months. I think there might be family history I don't know about. Oh, sweetheart, there's quite a lot of family history you don't know about. Your grandmother was very protective of you, but she told me everything. Why don't you come over for tea this afternoon? This conversation is better had in person. I drove to Eleanor's house on Elmwood Drive, the same tree-lined street where my grandmother had lived until her death 4 years ago. Eleanor's small cottage looked exactly as I remembered. White picket fence, rose bushes in the front yard, and a porch swing where she and Helen had spent countless afternoons discussing neighborhood news. Eleanor met me at the door wearing a floral house dress and her signature pearl earrings. Her white hair was perfectly styled, and despite her age, she moved with surprising energy. Come in, dear. I've made your grandmother's favorite tea cakes. Her living room was cozy and cluttered with photographs spanning decades of family gatherings, garden parties, and community events. The walls were covered with needlepoint samplers and watercolor paintings, creating an atmosphere of gentle domesticity. Now then, Eleanor said, settling into her favorite armchair, tell me exactly what happened yesterday. I explained the entire situation coming home to find movers in my house, discovering my parents' detailed planning, finding the financial documents and real estate communications. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. I'm not surprised, she said when I finished. Your grandmother saw this coming years before she died. What do you mean? Eleanor stood up and walked to an antique secretary desk in the corner of the room. She returned with a thick manila envelope sealed with tape. Helen asked me to keep this safe and only give it to you if something like this ever happened. She said Patricia and Harold had already shown their true colors, and she was afraid they would try to take advantage of you after she was gone. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, legal documents, and a letter written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. The letter was dated 6 months before Helen's death. My dearest Eliza, if Eleanor is giving you this letter, it means my fears about your parents have come true. I am writing this to give you the information you will need to protect yourself from their manipulation. 3 years ago, Patricia convinced me to give her power of attorney over my finances while I recovered from my hip surgery. I trusted her because she was my daughter and seemed genuinely concerned about my welfare. What I discovered later was that Patricia had been taking money from my accounts to support her and Harold's lifestyle. Over the course of 18 months, they withdrew $37,428 from my savings without my knowledge or permission. I stopped reading, my hands shaking. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, are you saying my parents stole money from Grandma Helen?" Eleanor nodded sadly. "That's exactly what I'm saying, dear. Your grandmother was devastated when she found out. She felt so betrayed, especially by Patricia." I continued reading. The missing money represented my entire medical emergency fund and most of my retirement savings. When I confronted Patricia about the withdrawals, she claimed they had been loans to help Harold through a difficult period at work. She promised to pay the money back, but over the next year she returned only $3,000. I realized then that my daughter and son-in-law saw me as a financial resource rather than a person deserving of respect and security. This broke my heart, but it also opened my eyes to their true character. I changed my will immediately, leaving my house directly to you rather than to Patricia as I had originally planned. I also revoked Patricia's power of attorney and moved my remaining assets to accounts she could not access. I am telling you this not to turn you against your parents, but to help you understand their mindset. They believe they are entitled to family resources regardless of the consequences for others. They will likely try to manipulate you the same way they manipulated me. Be strong, my dear granddaughter. Protect yourself and your future. You owe them nothing beyond basic human decency, and you certainly don't owe them your security or your home. All my love, Grandma Helen. I set the letter down, feeling nauseous. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, did you know about this while it was happening?" I suspected something was wrong. Helen became very anxious about money during that period, which was unusual for her. She had always been financially secure, but suddenly she was worried about being able to afford her medications and groceries. "Why didn't she report the theft to the police?" Eleanor sighed deeply. "Because Patricia was her daughter. Helen couldn't bring herself to have her own child arrested even after being betrayed so completely. She thought changing her will and revoking the power of attorney would be enough to protect her remaining assets." I looked through the bank statements Eleanor had preserved. The pattern of withdrawals was clear, regular amounts of $500 to $1,500, always when Helen was in the hospital or recovering from medical procedures. Patricia had systematically drained her mother's life savings, while Helen was at her most vulnerable. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, there's something else I need to ask you. Do you think my parents might have told other family members a different version of these events?" "Oh, I'm sure they did. Patricia was very good at presenting herself as Helen's devoted caregiver. She made sure everyone knew how much time she was spending at the hospital, how much she was sacrificing to take care of her mother. But she was actually stealing from her." "Yes, and she was very clever about it. She made sure the withdrawals looked like legitimate expenses, medical bills, home maintenance, emergency repairs. If Helen hadn't been keeping such careful records, the theft might never have been discovered." I studied the documents more carefully. The financial trail was clear and damning, but what struck me most was how similar this pattern was to what my parents had attempted to do to me. They had used their access to my house to gather financial information, just as Patricia had used her power of attorney to access Helen's accounts. They had planned to use legal documents to transfer my property without my knowledge, just as they had used Helen's trust to steal her money. They had even used the same emotional manipulation, claiming they were helping family, positioning themselves as the responsible ones, making difficult decisions for the greater good. Mrs. Fitzgerald, did Grandma Helen ever express concern that they might try something similar with me? Eleanor's expression grew troubled. She was very worried about that, especially after she learned about your house purchase. She said Patricia had been asking too many questions about your income, your mortgage terms, your career prospects. Questions like how much you earned, whether your job was stable, whether you were planning to get married and start a family. Patricia seemed particularly interested in whether you really needed such a large house for just yourself. The same arguments they had made yesterday. My parents had been laying the groundwork for this theft for years, probably since the day I bought the house. There's one more thing you should know, Eleanor continued. About 6 months before Helen died, Patricia brought a man to her house claiming he was a financial advisor. Helen felt pressured to sign some documents about estate planning, but she refused and asked them to leave. A financial advisor? Helen suspected he was actually a lawyer or someone who could help Patricia gain control of her assets legally. She never found out for sure because she kicked them both out of her house that day. I thought about the quitclaim deed I had found in my office, already partially filled out and ready for my signature. My parents had been planning to use the same legal manipulation on me that they had attempted with Helen. Mrs. Fitzgerald, would you be willing to speak with the police about what you know? This information could be crucial for my case. Of course, dear. Your grandmother made me promise to protect you from them if anything ever happened. She would want their pattern of behavior to be exposed. As I drove home from Eleanor's house, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Gavin's number. "Elisa, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Can I come over?" "Gavin, there's a restraining order in place. Mom and Dad can't come within 500 feet of my property, and I'm not sure what the legal implications are for you visiting." "The restraining order doesn't apply to me. I checked with a lawyer. Please, Elisa, I have information you need to hear." Something in his voice sounded different, less desperate, more determined. "What kind of information?" "Information about Jessica, about our financial situation, about things I didn't tell you yesterday because I was scared and confused." "Scared of what?" "Scared of Jessica. Scared of what she might do if she found out I was telling you the truth." I pulled into my driveway, my mind racing. The truth about what? The truth about who really planned this whole thing. It wasn't Mom and Dad Elisa. They were just the ones who got caught. The line went quiet except for the sound of Gavin's ragged breathing. "Come over," I said finally, "but come alone. If Jessica is with you, I'm not opening the door. She doesn't know I'm calling you, and if things go the way I think they might, she's going to be very angry when she finds out." As I unlocked my new front door locks, I realized that the story I thought I understood was about to become much more complicated. My parents weren't the masterminds of this scheme. They were just the pawns who had been sacrificed when the real plan fell apart. I had barely finished putting away Eleanor's documents when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the front window, I could see Gavin's Honda, but he wasn't getting out of the driver's seat. Instead, he sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at my house, like he was gathering courage for something unpleasant. After 5 minutes, he finally emerged and walked slowly toward my front door. His usual casual confidence was completely gone, replaced by the posture of someone carrying a heavy burden. I opened the door before he could knock. "You look terrible." "I feel terrible." His voice was hoarse, as if he had been yelling or crying. "Can we sit down? This is going to take a while." I led him to my living room, which was still partially disrupted from yesterday's chaos. Boxes sat in corners where the movers had left them, and my furniture remained slightly askew from its original positions. Gavin sat on the edge of my sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Before I tell you anything else, I need you to know that I love Jessica. I really do, but I think I've been blind to who she really is." "What do you mean?" "I mean, the woman I married isn't the woman I thought she was. And yesterday, after we left your house, she showed me a side of herself I'd never seen before." He ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture I remembered from our childhood when he had done something wrong and was trying to figure out how much trouble he was in. "Elisa, the pregnancy complications Jessica told you about. They were real, but they weren't random. She caused them." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean she caused them?" "She wasn't taking her prenatal vitamins. She was drinking alcohol regularly, sometimes heavily. She was staying up all night and sleeping all day, not eating properly, not taking care of herself at all. When I tried to talk to her about it, she would explode into these rages about how I didn't understand the stress she was under." "Stress about what?" Gavin's face crumpled. "Stress about money, but not the kind of money stress you'd expect from someone whose husband lost his job." He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of a banking app. The account balance showed negative $873. This is our checking account, but 3 months ago we had $14,000 saved up. I had been putting away money for over a year to prepare for the baby. Where did the money go? Online gambling. Jessica has been playing poker and blackjack on internet sites sometimes for 12 or 14 hours at a time. She told me she was researching baby products or looking for jobs online, but she was actually gambling away our entire savings. My mouth fell open. $14,000? $14,000. Plus she ran up credit card debt of another $18,000 trying to chase her losses. I didn't know about any of it until 2 weeks ago when I found the credit card statements hidden in her car. The scope of the deception was staggering. Gavin, how did you not know you lived together? She was very good at hiding it. She would wait until I went to work or fell asleep, then stay up all night gambling on her laptop. She told me she had insomnia from the pregnancy, so I thought she was just having trouble sleeping. But the eviction notice, your job loss, both real but not connected the way we told you. I did lose my job, but that happened after we were already in financial trouble. Jessica's gambling had drained our savings, we were behind on rent, and I was so stressed about our situation that my work performance suffered. When the layoffs came, I was an easy choice because I had been making mistakes and missing deadlines. I tried to process this information. Yesterday, Jessica had seemed like a vulnerable pregnant woman caught up in my parents' scheme. Now I was learning she might have been a central figure in creating the crisis that led to the scheme in the first place. Gavin, when did Mom and Dad first contact you about using my house? That's the thing, Elisa. They didn't contact us. We contacted them. What? 3 weeks ago, when Jessica found out about the eviction notice, she said she had an idea for solving our housing problem. She said your house was too big for just one person and that you probably felt lonely living there by yourself. She said she had been thinking about it for months ever since Mom showed her the pictures of your house when we announced the pregnancy. She convinced me that asking to move in temporarily would actually be doing you a favor because you'd have family around. I felt sick. Jessica convinced you to ask for my house. Not exactly. She convinced me to ask Mom to ask you about letting us stay there temporarily. She said it would be better coming from Mom because you and I don't talk very often anyway. And what did Mom say when you asked her? Gavin's expression grew pained. She said she would handle everything. She seemed excited about the idea, actually. She started talking about how it would be good for the family to be closer together and how you needed to learn to be more generous with the blessings you'd been given. The manipulation was becoming clearer. Jessica had identified my house as a solution to her gambling debts, but she had used my parents' existing resentments about my independence to make them feel like they were justified in taking it. Did Jessica ever suggest specific strategies for convincing me to agree? Gavin looked uncomfortable. She said you were very attached to material possessions and might not understand the importance of family. She suggested that Mom and Dad might need to be assertive about explaining why this was the right thing to do. Assertive how? She said sometimes people need help seeing past their own selfishness to do what's right. She said Mom and Dad knew you better than anyone and would know how to convince you. I was beginning to see how Jessica had manipulated everyone in this situation. She had created the financial crisis through her gambling addiction, then orchestrated a solution that would solve her problems at the expense of mine. Gavin, you said yesterday that Jessica seemed surprised and upset about the arrests. Was that genuine? He shook his head slowly. I don't think so. After we got home yesterday, she seemed more angry than upset. She kept saying that you were selfish and that this proved you didn't care about family. Even after learning that Mom and Dad had committed crimes, she said they wouldn't have needed to be so creative if you had just been reasonable about helping family in crisis. She made it sound like their arrest was your fault for being stubborn. And what do you think now? Gavin was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I think I've been married to someone I don't really know, and I think she's been using me to manipulate our entire family. What happened to make you realize this? This morning, Jessica got a phone call. She thought I was in the shower, but I could hear her from the bedroom. She was talking to someone about Plan B and how she might need to apply more pressure to make sure you cooperated. Plan B. I don't know exactly what she meant, but she mentioned something about making sure you understood the consequences of tearing apart a family over pride. She also said something about using the pregnancy to generate sympathy from other family members. The calculated nature of Jessica's manipulation was breathtaking. She wasn't just gambling away their money. She was orchestrating an elaborate scheme to steal mine. Did she know you were listening? No, I pretended to be asleep when she came back to the bedroom, but I started putting together things she had said over the past few weeks, comments I hadn't understood at the time. What kind of comments? Things like how unfair it was that some people had so much while others had so little. How you didn't appreciate what you had because you'd never really struggled for anything. How families should share resources instead of hoarding them selfishly. She was building a case against me. Exactly. She was creating a narrative where you were the villain and we were the victims. She made it seem so reasonable, so justified. I thought about Jessica's performance yesterday, the tears, the touching of her belly, the emotional appeals about the baby needing a stable home. It had all been carefully calculated manipulation. Gavin, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did Jessica ever suggest that Mom and Dad should take action without asking me first? His face went pale. Last week, she said something about how sometimes people need to be presented with a fait accompli to overcome their initial resistance to change. A fait accompli. She said if you came home to find us already moved in and settled, you might realize it wasn't such a bad arrangement. She said confronting people with reality was sometimes kinder than letting them agonize over decisions. She told our parents to steal my house. She didn't use those words, but yes, I think that's exactly what she did. We sat in silence for several minutes while I processed this information. Jessica hadn't just been a beneficiary of my parents' crimes, she had been the architect of the entire scheme. Gavin, what are you going to do with this information? I don't know. Part of me wants to protect Jessica because she's pregnant with my child, but another part of me is horrified by what she's done to our family. What about the gambling? Is she getting help for that? She refuses to admit she has a problem. She says it was just bad luck and that she would have won the money back if she'd had more time. That's classic addiction thinking. I know, I've been reading about gambling addiction online, and everything I'm learning matches her behavior perfectly. The lying, the manipulation, the blaming everyone else for the consequences of her choices. My phone buzzed with a text message. When I looked at the screen, I saw it was from an unknown number. This is Jessica. I know Gavin is at your house. We need to talk. I'm coming over. I showed the message to Gavin, who immediately looked panicked. She must have followed me. Or maybe she put tracking software on my phone. He grabbed his keys. I need to leave before she gets here. No, stay. I think it's time Jessica and I had an honest conversation. Elisa, you don't understand. When Jessica doesn't get what she wants, she can become unpredictable. Unpredictable how violent. She's thrown things, broken dishes, punched holes in walls. She's never hurt me directly, but she has a temper that can be really scary. Before I could respond, I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I could see Jessica walking toward my front door with determined, angry strides. Her earlier vulnerable demeanor was completely gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. As she reached my door, I realized I was about to meet the real Jessica for the first time. Jessica didn't bother knocking. She tried the front door handle first, and when she found it locked, she began pounding on the door with her fists. "Open this door, Elisa. I know Gavin is in there." I looked at Gavin, who had gone completely pale. "Does she have keys to my house?" "No, but she's been asking me to get copies made. She said it would be convenient for when we moved in." The pounding continued, accompanied by Jessica's increasingly agitated voice. "You can't hide from me forever. We need to discuss this situation like adults. I'm calling the police. I said, reaching for my phone. Wait, Gavin grabbed my arm. Let me try to calm her down first. If the police arrest her too, what happens to the baby? That's not my responsibility, Gavin. She's threatening me on my own property. Through the window, I could see Jessica had moved from the front door to my living room window. She was cupping her hands against the glass, trying to see inside. I can see you both in there, she shouted. Stop being cowards and open the door. I had heard enough. I dialed 911 while Gavin pleaded with me to give him a chance to de-escalate the situation. 911, what's your emergency? I have someone threatening me on my property, trying to force entry into my home. I need police assistance immediately. Are you in immediate physical danger? I'm locked inside my house, but the person outside is becoming increasingly agitated and aggressive. What's your address? I provided my information while Jessica continued her assault on my windows and doors. She had moved to the back patio and was trying the sliding glass door that led to my kitchen. Officers are en route. Please stay inside and avoid confrontation until they arrive. Elisa, please hang up the phone, Gavin begged. She's pregnant. Stress like this could hurt the baby. Then tell your wife to stop behaving like a criminal and leave my property. Jessica must have heard my voice through the window because she suddenly appeared back at the front door this time with her phone in her hand. Fine, she screamed. If you want to play hardball, we can play hardball. I'm calling every family member we have and telling them exactly what kind of person you really are. Within minutes, my phone started ringing with calls from extended family members. I didn't answer, but I could see the notifications piling up: Aunt Margaret, Cousin Dave, Uncle Tom, even my great-aunt Helen's sister Rose, who I hadn't spoken to in years. Jessica had activated the family gossip network as a weapon against me. She's telling them her side of the story first, Gavin said miserably. She's making you look like the villain who destroyed the family over greed. 2 police cars arrived within 10 minutes. Through my window, I watched Officer Martinez approach Jessica, who immediately switched from aggressive to vulnerable, placing her hand on her pregnant belly and affecting a trembling voice. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Jessica gesturing toward my house while talking rapidly to the officers. She was clearly trying to position herself as the victim in this situation. Officer Thompson knocked on my front door. Ms. Morrison, it's Officer Thompson. Could you step outside, please? I opened the door to find Jessica standing next to the police cars, tears streaming down her face in what appeared to be a perfectly timed emotional display. Officer Thompson, this woman has been threatening me and trying to break into my house. Ma'am, Mrs. Morrison here says you're preventing her from seeing her husband and that you've been spreading lies about her family situation. I stared at Jessica in disbelief. She's been pounding on my doors and windows, trying to force her way into my home. She says she was just trying to get your attention because you wouldn't answer her phone calls. Jessica stepped forward, still crying. Officer, I'm 6 months pregnant and terrified about where my family is going to live. Elisa invited us to stay in her house, but now she's changed her mind and won't even talk to us about working something out. That is completely false. I never invited anyone to live in my house. Officer Martinez consulted her notes. Ms. Morrison, weren't you the complainant in yesterday's breaking and entering case involving your parents? Yes, and Jessica is married to my brother, who was supposed to be the beneficiary of my parents' theft. I'm trying to save this family, Jessica protested. Gavin's parents made a mistake, but they were just trying to help us provide for our baby. Now, Elisa wants to send them to prison and leave us homeless out of spite. The manipulation was masterful. Jessica had positioned herself as the reasonable family member, trying to keep everyone together while painting me as the vindictive one, tearing everyone apart. Officer Martinez, this woman has no right to be on my property. Yesterday I learned that she has been orchestrating a scheme to steal my house, and today she's here trying to intimidate me into cooperating with that scheme. Orchestrating a scheme. Jessica's voice rose to a pitch that suggested outrage. I'm a pregnant woman whose husband lost his job. I haven't orchestrated anything. Gavin finally stepped forward. Actually, officers, that's not entirely accurate. Jessica turned to stare at him with an expression of shock and betrayal. "Gavin, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you haven't been completely honest with anyone about our financial situation or how this whole mess started." "Shut up, Gavin. You don't know what you're talking about." The mask was slipping. Jessica's vulnerable pregnant woman act was cracking under pressure. "Officers." Gavin continued, "My wife has been gambling online and has lost over $30,000 of our savings. She's the one who came up with the idea of asking to move into my sister's house, and she's the one who encouraged my parents to take action without getting Elisa's permission first." Jessica's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, rage, panic, and finally cold calculation. "That's a lie," she said flatly. "Gavin is having some kind of breakdown from the stress of unemployment. He's been making up stories and blaming me for problems that aren't my fault." Officer Thompson looked between them with obvious confusion. "Sir, are you saying your wife was involved in planning yesterday's incident?" "I'm saying she created the crisis that led to yesterday's incident, and then she manipulated my parents into believing they were helping solve a family emergency." "This is insane," Jessica exploded. "I'm 6 months pregnant. I can't even stay awake for more than a few hours at a time. How could I orchestrate some elaborate scheme?" "Because you've been staying awake all night, gambling instead of sleeping," Gavin replied quietly. The revelation hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Jessica stared at Gavin with undisguised hatred. "You're going to regret this, Gavin. You're going to regret choosing her over your own wife and child." "I'm not choosing anyone over anyone. I'm just telling the truth." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to need you to leave this property immediately. Ms. Morrison has asked you to leave, and you have no legal right to be here." "Fine, but this isn't over." Jessica looked directly at me. "You think you've won something, but you haven't. I know things about this family that could destroy all of you, and if you don't start cooperating with finding a solution that works for everyone, I'm going to make sure those things become public knowledge." "What things?" I asked, despite myself. Jessica smiled for the first time since arriving, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Ask your precious grandmother's neighbor about the missing jewelry. Ask your parents about their bankruptcy filing 2 years ago. Ask Gavin about the real reason he lost his job." With that, she turned and walked back to her car, leaving all of us staring after her in confusion and growing dread. As Jessica drove away, Officer Martinez turned to me. "Ms. Morrison, I think you need to speak with a lawyer immediately. This situation is becoming more complicated than a simple family dispute." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if this woman has been orchestrating fraud schemes and making threats, you need legal protection beyond what a restraining order can provide." Gavin looked devastated. "Elisa, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Jessica was capable of this level of manipulation." "We'll deal with family issues later," I said. "Right now I need to understand what kind of legal position I'm in." After the officers left, I called the law office of Sarah Williams, an attorney who specialized in family financial crimes. Her receptionist scheduled an emergency consultation for that afternoon. As I prepared for the meeting, I gathered every document I had found: the financial surveillance materials, the real estate communications, the quitclaim deed, and Eleanor's evidence about my grandmother's stolen money. But Jessica's parting words kept echoing in my mind. What missing jewelry? What bankruptcy filing? What was the real reason Gavin lost his job? I had thought I was beginning to understand the scope of my family's deception, but Jessica's threats suggested there were still secrets I hadn't uncovered. Secrets that could apparently destroy all of us. The law office of Sarah Williams occupied the 3rd floor of a modern building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city courthouse across the street. The symbolism wasn't lost on me as I sat in the waiting room, clutching my folder of evidence and trying to calm my racing heart. Sarah Williams was a woman in her early 50s with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She had built a reputation defending clients in complex family financial crime cases, and her office walls were lined with legal awards and certificates that testified to her expertise. "Ms. Morrison," she said as she reviewed my documents, "what you've brought me suggests a pattern of financial manipulation and fraud that goes well beyond a simple family dispute. That's what I'm afraid of, and I think there might be even more that I don't know about yet. Tell me about the threats your sister-in-law made." I recounted Jessica's parting words about missing jewelry bankruptcy filings and secrets that could destroy the family. Sarah made notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Has anyone in your family ever mentioned financial difficulties or legal problems?" "Not directly, but my grandmother's neighbor told me that my parents had stolen $37,000 from my grandmother's medical fund before she died, and Gavin mentioned that his job loss might not have been as simple as he originally told me." Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing the information. "Ms. Morrison, I think we need to conduct a comprehensive investigation into your family's financial history. What you're describing suggests the possibility of a criminal enterprise rather than isolated incidents of theft." A criminal enterprise. Multiple family members engaging in coordinated fraud over an extended period. If that's what we're dealing with, you need protection beyond simple criminal charges for breaking and entering. Her phone rang and she answered with a brief, "Williams." After listening for a moment, she said, "Send him up immediately." "Ms. Morrison, that was my investigator. Your brother Gavin is downstairs asking to speak with you. He says he has information that's crucial to your case." "Should I talk to him?" "With me present, yes. If he's willing to provide testimony about the fraud scheme, it could strengthen your position considerably." Gavin appeared in Sarah's office doorway 5 minutes later, looking haggard and nervous. His clothes were rumpled, his hair uncombed, and he had the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who hadn't slept. "Elisa, thank you for agreeing to see me. I know you have every right to never trust me again." Sarah gestured for him to sit down. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Ms. Morrison's attorney. Anything you say here could potentially be used in legal proceedings. Do you understand that?" "Yes, and I want everything I'm about to tell you to be used if it helps protect Elisa from Jessica." "Protect me from Jessica how I asked." Gavin rubbed his face with his hands. "After Jessica left your house yesterday, she came home and told me that if I ever betrayed her like that again, she would destroy both of us. Then she showed me evidence that she's been planning this for much longer than I realized." "What kind of evidence?" "Photos, documents, recordings. Elisa, she's been investigating our entire family for months, collecting information that could be used as blackmail." Sarah leaned forward with interest. "Blackmail? How?" "She has photographs of me at my workplace doing things that could get me fired. She has recordings of phone conversations between Mom and Dad discussing financial problems they've never told anyone about. She has copies of legal documents that prove our parents are in much deeper financial trouble than anyone knows." "Gavin, what did you do at your workplace that could get you fired?" He looked ashamed. "I was stealing. Small amounts of cash from the register office supplies tools that I could sell online. I thought nobody would notice, but Jessica had been following me to work and photographing me taking things." "You were stealing from your employer." "I was desperate. Jessica's gambling had drained our savings. We were behind on rent, and I felt like I had to do something to keep us afloat. I know it was wrong, but I didn't see any other options." Sarah made notes rapidly. "Mr. Morrison, were you fired for theft or laid off due to budget cuts?" "Both, sort of. My supervisor noticed inventory discrepancies and started investigating. I panicked and confessed before he could prove anything. He agreed not to press charges if I resigned immediately, so it went on the books as a voluntary resignation rather than termination for cause." "And Jessica documented your theft." "She said she was trying to help me be more careful, that she wanted to show me how obvious my behavior was so I could avoid getting caught. But now I realize she was creating evidence she could use against me later." I felt sick. "Gavin, how long was Jessica following you and recording you?" "At least 3 months, maybe longer." She has videos of me taking money photos of me loading stolen merchandise into my car, even recordings of me talking to coworkers about how to avoid the security cameras. Sarah looked up from her notes. Mr. Morrison, do you believe your wife was planning to use this evidence to control your behavior? I know she was. Last night when I told her I was thinking about telling you the truth about our financial situation, she showed me a flash drive with all the evidence. She said if I caused any more problems for her, she would send copies to my former employer, to the police, and to our entire family. That's extortion, Sarah said flatly. It gets worse. She has similar evidence about Mom and Dad. My stomach dropped. What kind of evidence? Audio recordings of them discussing their bankruptcy, filing their plan to use Grandma Helen's death as an opportunity to improve their financial situation, and their research into your property value and income. Our parents discussed using Grandma Helen's death as a financial opportunity. Gavin nodded miserably. Jessica started recording their phone conversations months ago using an app on her phone. She would call them regularly to chat about family news, but she was actually gathering evidence about their financial problems and their resentment about your independence. Sarah was taking notes furiously. Mr. Morrison, does your wife have recordings of your parents discussing the plan to take your sister's house? Yes, hours of recordings. She has them talking about how you don't deserve such a large house, how they should have inherited Grandma Helen's property instead of you, how they could help you make better financial decisions if they had more control over your assets. She recorded them planning to steal my house. She recorded them being bitter about your success and talking about how unfair it was that you had so much while Gavin had so little. Then she used those recordings to convince them that taking your house would actually be doing you a favor by teaching you to be less selfish. I stared at Gavin in horror. She manipulated our parents using their own words against them. She's been manipulating all of us. She recorded me talking about feeling jealous of your career success. She recorded Mom complaining about how you never visit or call. She recorded Dad saying he thought you had become spoiled and entitled. Then she played those recordings back to each of us to prove that the other family members shared our negative feelings. Sarah set down her pen. Mr. Morrison, what you're describing is a sophisticated manipulation scheme designed to create conflict within your family while positioning your wife as the innocent victim caught in the middle. Exactly. And now she's threatening to release all of this evidence publicly if Elisa doesn't cooperate with finding a solution to our housing problem. What kind of solution is she demanding? Gavin looked directly at me with desperate eyes. She wants you to agree to let us move into your house, temporarily drop all charges against Mom and Dad, and provide financial support while I look for a new job. In exchange, she'll keep all the evidence private. And if I refuse, she'll destroy all of us. She'll send the theft evidence to my former employer and the police. She'll send the financial evidence about Mom and Dad to our extended family and their creditors. She'll release recordings that make all of us sound like terrible people conspiring against you. Sarah stood up and walked to her window, staring out at the courthouse across the street. Ms. Morrison, your sister-in-law, has created a situation where she holds all the leverage. She can destroy your family members' reputations and legal standing, while positioning herself as the victim of their failed scheme. So what are my options? We fight back. We gather our own evidence, we expose her manipulation tactics, and we turn her weapons against her. How? Sarah turned back to face us with a determined expression. We give her exactly what she's offering everyone else, the truth, but we make sure our version of the truth is documented, verified, and legally protected. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to investigate Jessica Morrison as thoroughly as she's investigated your family. And we're going to find evidence that proves she's been running a criminal enterprise disguised as family drama. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Jessica had been playing a game where she made the rules and held all the cards. But now I had a lawyer who understood how to change the rules entirely. The game was far from over. I left Sarah Williams' office feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and oddly empowered. Having a legal advocate who understood the complexity of what I was facing made an enormous difference, but the scope of Jessica's manipulation was still hard to comprehend. As I drove home through my familiar neighborhood, I found myself looking at everything differently, wondering how many other secrets were hiding behind the suburban facades. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and messages from family members who had apparently received Jessica's version of events. I had been ignoring them, but I knew I would eventually have to address the rumors she was spreading. The challenge was figuring out how to tell my side of the story without revealing the legal strategies Sarah and I were developing. As I turned onto Maple Street, I was surprised to see my neighbor, Tom Chen, standing in his front yard, clearly waiting for me. Tom was a retired police detective in his 60s who had lived across the street for 15 years. We had always maintained a friendly but distant relationship, exchanging waves and brief conversations about weather and neighborhood news. I pulled into my driveway and walked across the street to where Tom was waiting. "Elisa, I hope you don't mind me approaching you like this, but I wanted you to know that several of us neighbors have been talking about what happened yesterday." My heart sank. I can imagine what people are saying. Actually, what people are saying might surprise you. We're concerned about the way your parents and that young woman have been behaving around here for months. Months. Tom nodded gravely. Your parents have been making regular visits to your house even when you weren't home. At first, we assumed they were helping with maintenance or checking on things while you traveled, but their behavior started seeming, systematic. Systematic how? They would arrive with notebooks and cameras. They would spend hours inside sometimes with other people we didn't recognize. Last month, your mother brought a man in a suit who spent a long time measuring your yard and taking photos of your house from different angles. I felt a chill. Did you recognize the man? No, but he had the look of someone in real estate or construction. Professional, you know. He spent a lot of time on his phone while your mother pointed out different features of your property. This was exactly what Eleanor had described happening to my grandmother Patricia, bringing strangers to evaluate property without the owner's knowledge. Tom, did you ever see my sister-in-law Jessica during these visits? The pregnant woman, yes, several times. She would sit in the car for hours while your parents worked inside talking on her phone. My wife Susan started to notice her because she seemed to be arguing with someone during these phone calls. Lots of animated gestures and raised voices. Did you hear any of what she was saying? Susan did. She was working in our front garden one afternoon when the woman's voice got particularly loud. Susan heard her saying things like, "She'll never agree to it voluntarily," and "We need to present her with a situation she can't refuse." My suspicions about Jessica's central role in planning this scheme were being confirmed by independent witnesses. Is Susan available to talk about what she heard? Absolutely. She's been wanting to tell someone about it for weeks, but we weren't sure if we should get involved in family business. When we saw the police cars yesterday, we realized this was more serious than family drama. Susan Chen was a retired elementary school teacher with the sharp observational skills that came from managing classrooms full of children for 30 years. She invited me into their kitchen and immediately began pulling out a small notebook. "I started keeping records after the third or fourth suspicious visit," she explained. "My teacher instincts told me something wasn't right about the whole situation." She flipped through pages of neat handwriting organized by date and time. The scope of surveillance was remarkable. April 15th, Patricia and Harold arrived at 10:30 a.m. with moving boxes and spent 3 hours inside. Patricia took photos of all the rooms while Harold made measurements. May 2nd, same routine, but this time Patricia brought a younger man with a clipboard who seemed to be cataloging items room by room. May 20th, Jessica arrived alone and sat outside for 2 hours making phone calls and taking photos of the house from different angles. June 8th, all 3 of them arrived together. Jessica went inside while Patricia and Harold stood in the yard having what appeared to be an intense conversation about money. Susan looked up from her notes. "Elisa, they weren't just visiting your house. They were conducting business meetings about your house." What kind of business meetings? Planning sessions, strategy discussions. On June 15th, I heard Jessica telling someone on the phone that Phase 1 was complete and they were ready to move to Phase 2. She specifically mentioned that you would be out of the picture for a full week in November. I was in Denver for a conference last week. Exactly. She knew your travel schedule months in advance. Tom rejoined our conversation from the living room where he had been making phone calls. Elisa, I've been talking to other neighbors, and you need to hear what they've observed. Other neighbors notice things too. Maria Santos, who runs the corner market, says your mother has been asking detailed questions about your shopping habits, your work schedule, and whether you seem happy living alone. Questions like whether you buy groceries for one person or multiple people, whether you seem lonely when you shop, whether you've ever mentioned wanting roommates or family nearby. The level of surveillance was staggering. My family had been studying my life like researchers preparing for an experiment. There's more, Tom continued. Bill Murphy, the mail carrier, says your parents approached him several months ago asking about your mail delivery. They wanted to know if you received a lot of bills, whether you seemed financially stressed, and if you ever had mail forwarded when you traveled. They were investigating my finances through my mail carrier. Susan nodded. It gets worse. Your mother told Maria Santos that you had asked her to help you find roommates because you were struggling with the mortgage payments. That's completely untrue. We know. Maria mentioned it to me because she was surprised given that you've never seemed to have money problems. But your mother was very convincing about it. I realized that Patricia had been laying groundwork for months creating a narrative in the neighborhood that would support their eventual theft. If anyone questioned why Gavin and Jessica were suddenly living in my house, the neighbors would already believe I had been seeking roommates due to financial difficulty. Did anyone else witness anything unusual? Tom consulted his own notes. Janet Wilson, 2 houses down, saw your father measuring your windows and doors on multiple occasions. She thought maybe you were having security upgrades done. Frank Rodriguez noticed that your parents had spare keys made at the hardware store in May. They told him they were house-sitting while you traveled. And Mrs. Patterson observed Jessica taking photos of your house at night, using the flash on her phone to illuminate different architectural features. The conspiracy was much larger than I had realized. My family hadn't just been planning to steal my house. They had been conducting a comprehensive intelligence operation against me for months. What made you all decide to share this information with me today? Susan and Tom exchanged glances. Susan spoke first. When we saw the police cars yesterday, we realized we might have been witnessing criminal activity without understanding what was happening. We felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. Plus, Tom added, that young woman came back this afternoon and started going door to door telling neighbors that you had invited her family to live with you, but then changed your mind and called the police out of spite. She's still spreading lies about me. She's trying to turn the neighborhood against you. She told Maria that you had promised to help with the baby, but then decided you were too selfish to follow through. Susan shook her head in disgust. The manipulation is breathtaking. She presents herself as this vulnerable pregnant victim while painting you as a cruel, selfish person who would rather see her own family homeless than share your resources. But we've been watching this situation develop for months, Tom said. We know she's been part of the planning from the beginning. She's not a victim, she's an architect. Are you willing to provide this information to the police and my lawyer? Absolutely, Susan replied immediately. We should have spoken up months ago when we first realized something suspicious was happening. We won't make that mistake again. Tom nodded in agreement. I spent 30 years in law enforcement, and this has all the hallmarks of a sophisticated fraud scheme. Your family was planning to steal your property, but they were also creating documentation and witness testimony to make the theft appear legitimate. What do you mean? They were establishing a pattern of evidence that would support their story if anyone questioned their actions. Financial hardship, family crisis, generous sister, offering help that she later reneged on. If they had succeeded in taking your house, they would have had a neighborhood full of witnesses ready to testify that you had agreed to the arrangement. The realization was chilling. My family hadn't just been stealing my house, they had been framing me as a willing participant in my own victimization. As I walked back to my house, I noticed other neighbors watching from their windows and yards. Word was spreading through the community that something significant was happening on Maple Street. My phone rang as I reached my front door. The caller ID showed Eleanor Fitzgerald's number. "Elisa, dear, I've been hearing the most disturbing rumors from other neighbors about what happened yesterday. Are you all right?" "I'm okay, Mrs. Fitzgerald, but I think there's a lot more to this story than even we realized yesterday." "I'm sure there is. Your grandmother always said Patricia was capable of more deception than people realized, but I'm calling with some good news." "Good news?" "I've been talking to other friends of Helen's people who knew your family during her final years. Several of them have information about your parents' financial problems and their treatment of your grandmother that you need to hear." "What kind of information?" "Information that proves this pattern of behavior goes back much further than we discussed yesterday. Helen wasn't their first victim, Elisa. She was just their most recent one before you." As the sun set over my neighborhood, I realized that the community I had lived in for 3 years was rallying to support me in ways I had never expected. People I barely knew were coming forward with evidence that could help protect me from my own family's fraud scheme. But Eleanor's words suggested that even this expanded understanding of the situation was just the beginning. My parents and Jessica had apparently been running criminal enterprises for years, targeting vulnerable family members and manipulating entire communities to cover their tracks. Tomorrow I would share all of this new evidence with Sarah Williams and Detective Martinez. Tonight I would finally feel secure in my own home, knowing that I had allies watching out for me. My family had tried to isolate me to make me an easier target. Instead, they had united my community in support of justice and truth. That realization gave me more strength than any legal strategy or evidence folder ever could. The next morning brought a call from Detective Martinez that would change everything I thought I knew about the scope of my family's crimes. "Ms. Morrison, we need you to come to the station immediately. Our financial crimes unit has been investigating the evidence you provided, and they've uncovered some disturbing information that goes far beyond the break-in at your house." "What kind of information?" "Information that suggests your parents and sister-in-law have been running a systematic fraud operation for several years. We're talking about identity theft, financial exploitation, and conspiracy charges that could result in federal prosecution." An hour later, I sat in a sterile conference room at the police station surrounded by boxes of documents and computer printouts. Detective Martinez was joined by Agent Rebecca Foster from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and a forensic accountant named David Park who specialized in family financial fraud cases. "Ms. Morrison." Agent Foster began, "What started as a simple breaking and entering case has revealed what appears to be an ongoing criminal enterprise. We need to walk you through what we've discovered." David Park opened the first box of documents. "We've been analyzing the financial surveillance materials you found in your home office. The level of detail suggests your parents had been conducting identity monitoring on you for over 2 years. Identity monitoring? They had access to your credit reports, bank statements, employment records, and tax returns. This goes far beyond the casual financial oversight you might expect from concerned parents." Agent Foster pulled out a series of printed emails. "We also found correspondence between your mother and multiple financial institutions, where she attempted to gain access to accounts in your name. She tried to access my bank accounts, unsuccessfully in most cases, but the attempts are documented. She contacted your mortgage company claiming to be calling on your behalf about payment modifications. She called your credit card companies asking about increasing credit limits. She even applied for a home equity line of credit using your property as collateral." My stomach dropped. "Did the home equity application go through?" "No, because the bank required your physical presence and signature. but the application included forged documentation suggesting you had authorized her to act on your behalf. Detective Martinez opened another folder. Ms. Morrison, were you aware that your parents filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago? No, I had no idea. The filing shows debts of over $120,000, mostly credit card debt and medical bills. But here's what's interesting. The timeline of their financial problems corresponds exactly with the timeline of increased surveillance on your finances. David Park spread out a series of charts and graphs. We can track a clear pattern. As your parents' debts increased, their monitoring of your assets became more systematic and aggressive. They were essentially treating your property and income as solutions to their financial crisis. But what about Jessica? Where does she fit into all this? Agent Foster smiled grimly. Jessica Morrison is where this case gets really interesting. We've been investigating her background, and she's not the innocent, pregnant victim she appears to be. She pulled out a thick file labeled Jessica Chen Morrison Financial History. Your sister-in-law has a criminal record in 3 states for fraud and identity theft. She's been arrested for credit card fraud in California, check fraud in Nevada, and gambling-related financial crimes in Arizona. Criminal record, but she and Gavin have only been married for 2 years, which is exactly when she arrived in your state and began her surveillance of your family. Ms. Morrison, we believe Jessica identified your family as targets and orchestrated her relationship with your brother specifically to gain access to your family's financial resources. The room seemed to spin around me. You're saying she married Gavin as part of a fraud scheme. We're saying she researched your family's financial situation before beginning a relationship with your brother. She knew about your property ownership, your parents' financial problems, and your grandmother's recent death before she ever met Gavin. Detective Martinez pulled out a series of photographs. These are surveillance photos from Jessica's previous fraud cases. She has a pattern of targeting families with real estate assets and elderly relatives with inheritances. David Park consulted his notes. In California, she convinced a boyfriend's family to let her manage their elderly father's finances. She stole $68,000 before disappearing. In Nevada, she married a man whose mother had recently inherited property. She manipulated the family into signing over power of attorney, then liquidated the assets and fled the state. In Arizona, she targeted a family dealing with a gambling addiction. She convinced them she could help solve their financial problems, then use their desperation to gain control of their assets. Agent Foster leaned forward. Ms. Morrison, your sister-in-law, is what we call a family infiltrator. She specializes in identifying vulnerable families, embedding herself through romantic relationships, and then orchestrating elaborate schemes to steal their assets. But the pregnancy, is that even real? The pregnancy is real, but it's also strategic. Jessica has used pregnancy as emotional leverage in every one of her previous schemes. The expectation of a grandchild makes family members more willing to share resources and less likely to question suspicious behavior. Detective Martinez pulled out another file. We've also discovered that Jessica has been in contact with known gambling creditors who have histories of using violence to collect debts. The financial pressure you've been hearing about isn't just from legitimate gambling losses. What do you mean? We mean Jessica borrowed money from loan sharks to finance her gambling, and those debts come with physical threats if not repaid. The urgency around stealing your house wasn't just about housing, it was about keeping Jessica alive. Agent Foster nodded grimly. These creditors don't negotiate payment plans. They expect immediate repayment, usually through liquidation of assets like real estate. Your house would have been sold immediately after the deed transfer, with the proceeds going directly to Jessica's gambling debts. The scope of the deception was overwhelming. So my entire family was manipulated into committing crimes to solve Jessica's gambling debt crisis. Exactly. She identified your parents' financial vulnerabilities and your property as the perfect solution to her problem. Then she orchestrated a scheme that would destroy your family while saving her life. David Park pulled out a timeline chart. We can track Jessica's activities month by month. She began researching your family 6 months before she even met Gavin. She studied your parents' bankruptcy, filing your property records, your grandmother's obituary, and your employment history. She researched my grandmother's obituary. Estate records are public information. Jessica would have known about your inheritance, your property value, and your family dynamics before ever approaching your brother. Detective Martinez leaned back in her chair. Ms. Morrison, what we're dealing with here isn't a family dispute that got out of hand. This is a sophisticated criminal enterprise run by a professional fraud artist who specializes in destroying families. What happens now? Agent Foster consulted her notes. We're preparing federal charges against Jessica Morrison for identity theft conspiracy to commit fraud and racketeering. The charges against your parents will likely be reduced to cooperation agreements if they're willing to testify against Jessica. Cooperation agreements. Your parents were victims of Jessica's manipulation just like you were. The evidence suggests they genuinely believed they were helping solve a family crisis, not participating in a fraud scheme. But they still broke into my house and tried to steal my belongings. Yes, and they'll face consequences for that. But the federal charges will focus on Jessica as the mastermind of the criminal enterprise. Detective Martinez pulled out one final document. Ms. Morrison, there's something else you need to know. Jessica's gambling creditors have been conducting their own surveillance of your property. We have evidence that your house was being watched by people connected to organized crime. My blood ran cold. Organized crime. The loan sharks Jessica borrowed from have connections to larger criminal organizations. They've been monitoring your house as collateral for Jessica's debts, even though you obviously had no knowledge of owing them anything. Agent Foster nodded. Which means your safety could be at risk until this situation is resolved. We're recommending protection protocols until Jessica and her associates are in custody. What kind of protection protocols? Enhanced security at your home, regular police patrols of your neighborhood, and immediate notification if any suspicious individuals are observed near your property. As I left the police station that afternoon, my head was spinning with the realization that what I had thought was a family betrayal was actually an elaborate criminal conspiracy orchestrated by a professional fraud artist. My parents hadn't just been greedy or manipulative. They had been victims of a scheme designed to destroy our family from the inside out. But more frightening than anything was the knowledge that dangerous people had been watching my house, viewing my property as collateral for debts I never knew existed. The game Jessica had been playing was much more dangerous than I had realized, and it was far from over. 3 days after my meeting with the FBI, the dangerous reality of Jessica's gambling debts came crashing into my life in a way I never could have imagined. I was working from home, catching up on graphic design projects that had been neglected during the chaos of the past week, when my doorbell rang at 2 p.m. Through the peephole, I could see 2 men in expensive suits standing on my front porch. Neither of them looked familiar, and something about their posture made me immediately uncomfortable. I didn't open the door. Ms. Morrison. The older man's voice was polite but carried an undertone of authority that made my skin crawl. We'd like to speak with you about Jessica Morrison. We understand she's family. I don't know anyone by that name. I called through the door, following the safety protocols Agent Foster had outlined. Ma'am, we know that's not accurate. We have documentation showing Jessica Morrison is married to your brother Gavin Morrison. We also have records indicating this property has been designated as collateral for outstanding debts. My blood turned to ice. This property is not collateral for anyone's debts. You have incorrect information. Perhaps we could discuss this inside. We're reasonable people, Ms. Morrison. We prefer to resolve financial matters through conversation rather than other methods. I immediately called 911, speaking quietly so the men outside wouldn't hear me. I have 2 unknown men at my front door claiming my house is collateral for someone else's gambling debts. I need police assistance immediately. Are you in immediate danger? I don't know. They're being polite but threatening, and they're connected to organized crime, according to the FBI. Officers are en route. Stay inside and don't open the door. Through my living room window, I could see the men walking around my house, examining my security cameras and making notes in small notebooks. They moved with the casual confidence of people who were used to intimidating others. My phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a Nevada area code. Ms. Morrison, this is Vincent Romano. I believe my associates are currently at your residence. Mr. Romano, I don't know who you are or why you think you have any connection to my property. I'm the person Jessica Morrison owes $82,000 to plus interest and penalties. That amount is now $96,000 and growing daily. Jessica Morrison's debts have nothing to do with me. Actually, they do. Jessica used your property as collateral when she borrowed money from my organization 6 months ago. We have documentation showing she presented herself as a co-owner of the property at 1247 Maple Street. She's not a co-owner. She's never been a co-owner. She has no legal claim to my house whatsoever. That may be true, Ms. Morrison, but our agreement was with someone who claimed to have authority over that property. When she borrowed our money, she assured us that the property could be liquidated if necessary. Mr. Romano, Jessica Morrison lied to you. She has no authority over my property, no legal claim to it, and no right to use it as collateral for anything. Perhaps, but that creates a problem for both of us. Jessica borrowed money in good faith using what she claimed was legitimate collateral. If that collateral doesn't exist, she still owes the money and we still need to collect it. That's between you and her. Leave me out of it. I'm afraid it's not that simple. When people borrow money from our organization using fraudulent collateral, we typically hold everyone connected to the fraud responsible for repayment. Everyone connected. I had nothing to do with Jessica's borrowing. You're her sister-in-law. You're family. In our business, family members are responsible for each other's debts. The threat was clear, even though Romano was being careful not to make explicit statements that could be recorded and used as evidence. Police cars were pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Romano's associates calmly walking back to a black sedan parked across the street. Mr. Romano, the police are here. Your people need to leave my property immediately. Of course, we're law-abiding citizens, Ms. Morrison. But this conversation isn't over. Jessica owes us money, and one way or another, that money will be repaid. The line went dead as Officer Thompson approached my front door. Ms. Morrison, are you all right? I'm okay, but I think I just received threats from organized crime figures connected to my sister-in-law's gambling debts. The men who were here, they're across the street in a black sedan. They claim my house is collateral for Jessica's gambling debts and that family members are responsible for repaying those debts. Officer Thompson immediately radioed for backup and approached the sedan. I watched from my window as he spoke with the two men for several minutes before returning to my house. Ms. Morrison, those men claim they're private investigators working on behalf of a financial services company. They showed me business cards and identification. Did the identification look legitimate? As far as I could tell, yes. But that doesn't mean their claims about your property are legitimate. Officer Thompson, the FBI, told me that Jessica Morrison has connections to loan sharks and organized crime. These men are probably not legitimate private investigators. We'll run their license plates and identification information through our databases. In the meantime, I'm going to recommend that you contact Agent Foster immediately and consider staying somewhere else until this situation is resolved. After the officers left, I called Agent Foster and reported the encounter. Her response was immediate and alarming. Ms. Morrison Vincent Romano is a known associate of the Castellano crime family. He's been under federal investigation for loan sharking and extortion for 3 years. So these are definitely not legitimate debt collectors. Definitely not. And the fact that he contacted you directly means Jessica's debts are significant enough to warrant personal attention from high-level criminals. How much danger am I in? Significant danger. Romano's organization doesn't typically make social calls. They were assessing your property and your security measures. What do I do? First, you need to leave your house immediately. We're arranging protective custody until we can arrest Jessica and build a case against Romano's organization. Protective custody. A safe location with federal protection. Romano's people won't hesitate to use violence if they believe it will help them collect Jessica's debts. But why me? Why not Gavin? He's Jessica's husband. Because Gavin doesn't own property worth $96,000. You do. From their perspective, you're the logical target for debt collection. 2 hours later, I was sitting in an FBI safe house 30 miles outside the city, surrounded by federal agents, and trying to process the fact that my life had been completely upended by my sister-in-law's criminal activities. Agent Foster briefed me on the situation. We've been tracking Romano's organization for years, but we've never had solid evidence connecting them to specific crimes. Jessica's case gives us the opportunity to build a federal case against them. How? Jessica borrowed money using fraudulent collateral, which constitutes federal fraud. Romano's threats against you constitute extortion. If we can get Jessica to cooperate, we can use her testimony to prosecute the entire organization. Will Jessica cooperate? She doesn't have much choice. We arrested her 3 hours ago on federal fraud charges. She's looking at 15 to 20 years in prison unless she provides testimony against Romano. What about Gavin? Is he safe? We have Gavin in protective custody as well. Romano's people approached him at his workplace this morning with similar threats. How did this happen? How did Jessica get involved with these people? Agent Foster consulted her notes. Jessica met Romano 6 months ago at an illegal gambling establishment in Nevada. She lost $30,000 in a single night and convinced Romano to loan her money to continue gambling. She borrowed money to chase gambling losses. Classic gambling addiction behavior. She convinced herself she could win back her losses if she just had more money to bet with. And she used my house as collateral without my knowledge. She presented Romano with photographs of your property, copies of your property deed, and false documentation, suggesting she had legal authority to use the property as collateral. Where did she get copies of my property deed? Your parents provided them. They thought they were helping Jessica research housing options for your brother's family. They had no idea she was using the documents to secure loans from criminals. The manipulation was staggering. Jessica had used my parents' access to my property documents to commit fraud against organized crime, then manipulated my entire family into stealing my house to cover her crimes. Agent Foster, how long will I need to stay in protective custody? Until we can arrest Romano and his associates. We're hoping Jessica's testimony will give us enough evidence for federal racketeering charges. And if Jessica doesn't cooperate, Agent Foster's expression was grim. Then Romano will continue to view your property as legitimate collateral, and your family will remain in danger indefinitely. As night fell over the safe house, I realized that Jessica's crimes had endangered not just our family's relationships, but our lives. Her gambling addiction had connected us to dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to use violence to collect what they believed was owed to them. The stakes of this situation were higher than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about family betrayal or financial fraud anymore. This was about survival. 5 days into protective custody, I received a call from Sarah Williams with news that would fundamentally change the trajectory of the case. Elisa, your parents have agreed to a plea bargain that includes full cooperation with the federal investigation. They're going to testify against Jessica in exchange for reduced charges. What kind of reduced charges? Community service restitution payments and mandatory financial counseling. They'll avoid jail time if they provide complete testimony about how Jessica manipulated them into participating in the house theft. I was sitting in the sterile living room of the FBI safe house, watching federal agents monitor security cameras and communication systems. The past week had felt like living in a spy movie, except the danger was real and the consequences were permanent. Sarah, Are you saying my parents are finally willing to admit they were manipulated? More than that. They're willing to admit they were victims of a sophisticated fraud scheme. Your mother broke down during questioning yesterday and revealed the full scope of Jessica's emotional manipulation. What do you mean? Jessica convinced your parents that you had asked her to approach them about the housing situation. She told them you were too embarrassed to ask for help directly, but that you really wanted family nearby. She made them believe I wanted them to take my house. She made them believe you wanted to help but were too proud to admit it. She showed them edited text message conversations and fake emails that made it appear you had been discussing the situation with her privately. The manipulation was even more elaborate than I had realized. Fake emails. Jessica had created a Gmail account using a variation of your name and had been sending emails to herself pretending to be you. She showed these fake conversations to your parents as proof that you were secretly supportive of the housing arrangement. How did they not realize the emails were fake? Because Jessica is extremely skilled at this kind of manipulation. She had studied your communication style, your vocabulary, even your schedule patterns to make the fake emails appear authentic. Agent Foster, who had been listening to my conversation, gestured for the phone. Ms. Morrison, may I speak with your attorney? After a brief conversation, Agent Foster returned the phone to me. Elisa, your parents' testimony is crucial for our case against Jessica and Romano's organization, but they want to speak with you personally before agreeing to testify. They want to speak with me. They want to apologize and explain how they were manipulated. They also have information about Jessica's activities that could help us locate additional evidence. What kind of information? Sarah's voice came back through the phone. Information about Jessica's other victims. Your parents believe Jessica has been running similar schemes against other families. Other families? Families with property assets and vulnerable elderly relatives. Your parents think Jessica has been targeting multiple families simultaneously using the same manipulation tactics. Agent Foster nodded. If that's true, we could have a much larger case than we initially realized. Jessica might be responsible for defrauding dozens of families over several years. So you want me to speak with my parents? We want you to consider it. Their information could help us protect other potential victims and build a stronger case against Jessica's entire operation. 2 hours later, I found myself in a secure conference room at the FBI field office sitting across from my parents for the first time since watching them get arrested in my living room. Patricia looked like she had aged 10 years in the past week. Her usually perfect silver hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Harold appeared equally devastated. His normally authoritative posture was gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of someone carrying unbearable guilt. Elisa. Patricia began, her voice barely above a whisper. We owe you an apology that we can never adequately express. Mom, I know Jessica manipulated you. Agent Foster explained some of what happened. No, you don't understand the full scope of it. Harold's voice was hoarse. We didn't just fall for her lies. We actively participated in violating your privacy and planning to steal your property because we wanted to believe her version of events. What do you mean? Patricia pulled out a tissue and wiped her eyes. We wanted to believe that you secretly wanted to help Gavin, but were too proud to admit it. We wanted to believe that taking your house was actually doing you a favor by teaching you to be more generous. Jessica told us things about you that we wanted to hear because they confirmed our existing resentments. Harold continued. She said you were lonely living in such a big house by yourself. She said you felt guilty about having so much when Gavin was struggling. But those things weren't true. We know that now. But at the time, Jessica was so convincing. She had evidence. She had documentation. She had recordings of conversations that seemed to prove her claims. Agent Foster leaned forward. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, can you tell us about these recordings? Patricia nodded. Jessica played us audio recordings that she claimed were conversations between her and Elisa. In the recordings, Elisa was supposedly expressing concern about Gavin's financial situation and asking Jessica to help figure out a solution. But the voice in the recordings wasn't actually Elisa's. We thought it was at the time. Jessica is very good at voice manipulation technology. She had recorded conversations from Elisa's social media videos and used software to create fake audio clips. Harold pulled out his phone. We still have some of the fake evidence Jessica showed us. Text message screenshots, email printouts, even fake bank statements showing Elisa's supposed financial difficulties. Agent Foster examined Harold's phone with interest. This is sophisticated digital fraud. Jessica used multiple forms of fabricated evidence to support her manipulation. The worst part, Patricia said quietly, is that we wanted to believe it. Jessica's lies confirmed our suspicions that Elisa was selfish and needed to learn to be more generous with family. Those weren't suspicions, I said. Those were resentments you already had about my independence. Harold nodded miserably. You're right. We resented your success, your independence, your ability to buy a house and build a career without needing our help. Jessica just gave us permission to act on those resentments. She made us feel like we were being good parents by forcing you to help your brother, Patricia added. She convinced us that tough love was necessary to teach you about family obligations. Agent Foster was taking detailed notes. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, did Jessica ever mention other families she was helping in similar situations? Patricia and Harold exchanged glances. Yes, actually, Patricia said. She mentioned several other families who had successfully resolved housing crises through generous relatives. She specifically talked about a family in Colorado where an elderly grandmother had convinced her granddaughter to share her inheritance with struggling siblings, Harold recalled. And a family in Oregon where parents had helped their son's family move into his sister's house after financial difficulties, Patricia added. Agent Foster looked up sharply. Did she provide details about these other families? She said she had learned about conflict resolution strategies from these success stories, Harold replied. She made it sound like forcing family members to share resources was a common and effective approach. What Jessica was describing sounds like patterns of fraud similar to your situation, Agent Foster said. She may have been telling you about her other victims while presenting them as success stories. I felt sick. You're saying Jessica has been destroying other families the same way she destroyed ours. That's exactly what we're saying, and your parents' testimony could help us identify and contact those other victims. Patricia leaned forward earnestly. Elisa, we know we can never undo what we did to you, but if our testimony can help prevent Jessica from victimizing other families, maybe we can accomplish something positive from this nightmare. What exactly would your testimony involve? Harold consulted notes he had prepared. Complete documentation of Jessica's manipulation tactics, copies of all the fake evidence she provided, detailed timelines of how she convinced us to violate your privacy and plan the house theft. We're also prepared to testify about Jessica's connections to the gambling creditors, Patricia added. She told us about owing money to business associates who expected repayment through real estate liquidation. Agent Foster nodded approvingly. That testimony could be crucial for prosecuting Romano's organization. There's something else, Harold said quietly. Jessica mentioned that she had backup plans in case the house theft didn't work. She had researched other properties owned by family members that could serve as alternative collateral. Other properties. Your Uncle Tom's farm in Pennsylvania, your cousin David's condo in Florida. Jessica had been conducting financial surveillance on our entire extended family, looking for assets that could be used to pay her gambling debts. The scope of Jessica's criminal enterprise was staggering. She hadn't just targeted our immediate family, she'd been planning to victimize our entire extended family network. Agent Foster. I said, if my parents cooperate fully with your investigation, what happens to Jessica? With their testimony plus the evidence we've gathered about her previous fraud schemes and her connections to Romano's organization, Jessica is looking at federal charges that could result in 25 to 30 years in prison. And Romano, if we can prove he was using intimidation tactics to collect on fraudulent loans, he could face federal racketeering charges. I looked at my parents, seeing them clearly for the first time in years. They weren't master criminals or evil conspirators. They were flawed, resentful people who had been expertly manipulated by a professional fraud artist. "I'll support your cooperation with the investigation," I told them, "but our family relationship is going to require a lot of work to repair." Patricia began crying again. "We understand. We'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back, even if it takes the rest of our lives." Harold nodded. "We destroyed the most important thing we had, our relationship with our daughter, but maybe we can help prevent Jessica from destroying other families too." As we left the FBI office that afternoon, I realized that my parents' decision to cooperate with the investigation marked the beginning of a very long journey toward family healing. But for the first time since this nightmare began, justice seemed possible. The breakthrough in the federal investigation came exactly 1 week later, when Jessica's gambling addiction finally led to her complete downfall. I was in protective custody when Agent Foster called with news that would change everything. Jessica Morrison attempted to flee the country this morning. She was arrested at the airport carrying fake identification and $73,000 in cash. $73,000. Where did she get that much money? She liquidated assets that belonged to other victims. We've traced the money to at least 6 different families across 4 states. Jessica has been running multiple fraud schemes simultaneously. The scope of her criminal enterprise was far beyond what anyone had imagined. Agent Foster arranged for me to meet with Gavin, who'd been cooperating with investigators since his own arrest 3 days earlier. Gavin looked like a completely different person than the desperate man who had pleaded for my help just 2 weeks ago. The weight of understanding Jessica's true nature had transformed him from an enabler into someone determined to help expose the full scope of her crimes. "Elisa, I need you to know that I've been lying to you about my relationship with Jessica from the very beginning." We sat in the same FBI conference room where I had reconciled with our parents, but this conversation felt different. Gavin's honesty was cutting through years of deception and manipulation. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I knew Jessica had financial problems before we got married. I knew she had been involved in questionable activities in other states. I married her anyway because I was lonely and convinced myself that love could change her." "You knew she was a criminal." "I knew she had been arrested for fraud in California. She told me it was a misunderstanding, that she had been trying to help a boyfriend's family and had been unfairly prosecuted. I wanted to believe her story because I was in love with the person I thought she was." "But you didn't know about her targeting our family specifically." Gavin shook his head. "Not initially. But about 6 months ago, I started noticing that she knew things about you and our parents that I had never told her. Details about your income, your house, your travel schedule." "What kind of details?" "She knew exactly how much your mortgage payment was, even though I had never mentioned it. She knew about Grandma Helen's will and your inheritance, even though we had never discussed it. She knew about Mom and Dad's financial problems, even though they had never told anyone." "And you didn't think that was suspicious?" "I was scared to think too hard about it. By that time, Jessica was pregnant, and I was terrified of losing her. I convinced myself that families talk about these things, and maybe she had just been paying closer attention than I had." Agent Foster consulted her notes. "Mr. Morrison, when did you first realize your wife was actively planning to steal your sister's property?" "The night before the moving trucks arrived. Jessica was on the phone very late talking to someone about finalizing the transfer and making sure the timeline was maintained. When I asked her about it, she said she was coordinating with Mom and Dad about the move. But something about her explanation didn't feel right. She seemed nervous in a way that was different from her usual anxiety about money. She kept checking her phone and looking out windows like she was expecting something to go wrong." Did you confront her about your suspicions? Gavin's face crumpled. I should have. I should have called you immediately and warned you what was happening. But I was terrified that if I interfered with Jessica's plans, she would leave me and take the baby. So you allowed your family to commit crimes because you were afraid of losing Jessica. Yes, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life. Agent Foster leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, your wife abandoned you yesterday when the federal charges were filed. She emptied your joint bank account and attempted to flee the country without informing you of her plans. I know. She left me a note saying that I was too weak to handle the real world and that she needed to protect herself and the baby from my family's dysfunction. How do you feel about her abandonment? Gavin was quiet for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear. Relieved. For the first time in 2 years, I feel like I can think clearly without constantly worrying about Jessica's emotional state or financial crisis. I can see how completely she had manipulated my thinking and my loyalties. What do you see now that you couldn't see before? I see that Jessica never loved me. She saw me as a useful tool for accessing my family's resources. The pregnancy, the marriage, even the emotional intimacy we shared was all calculated manipulation designed to make me compliant with her fraud schemes. I watched my brother transform before my eyes from a victim of manipulation into someone capable of clear, honest self-reflection. Gavin, what about the baby? Are you prepared to raise a child whose mother is going to prison for multiple felonies? Yes. Whatever Jessica's crimes, this baby is innocent and deserves a stable, loving parent. I'm prepared to seek full custody and provide the kind of family stability that Jessica never experienced. Agent Foster smiled approvingly. Mr. Morrison, your cooperation with our investigation has been crucial. Your testimony about Jessica's manipulation tactics has helped us identify patterns that connect her to at least 12 other fraud cases across 6 states. 12 other families that Jessica targeted using similar manipulation strategies. She would research families with property assets and elderly relatives, then engineer romantic relationships with family members who could provide access to financial information. She's been doing this professionally for years. For at least 5 years, possibly longer. Jessica Morrison is one of the most sophisticated family infiltration fraud artists we've ever investigated. Gavin shook his head in amazement. I can't believe I was married to someone like that without realizing what she was. You weren't the only one she fooled, Agent Foster replied. Professional manipulators are experts at creating the illusion of genuine emotional connection. Jessica studied your vulnerabilities and crafted a persona specifically designed to appeal to your needs and desires. What happens to her now? She's been charged with federal fraud identity, theft conspiracy, and racketeering. With the evidence we've gathered from multiple victims, she's looking at 30 to 40 years in federal prison. And the baby? You'll have the opportunity to seek full custody through family court. Given Jessica's criminal status and the evidence of her manipulation, custody shouldn't be difficult to obtain. I looked at my brother and saw something I hadn't seen in years, genuine remorse combined with determination to build a better life. Gavin, if you get custody of the baby, what kind of father do you want to be? The kind of father who teaches his child to value honesty, integrity, and genuine family relationships. The kind of father who protects his child from people like Jessica, even if those people claim to love them. And what about our family relationships? How do we rebuild trust after everything that's happened? Gavin met my eyes directly. We rebuild it slowly through consistent actions rather than words. We rebuild it by being completely honest about our mistakes and working every day to be better people than we were when Jessica was manipulating us. Are you willing to go to therapy to address the issues that made you vulnerable to Jessica's manipulation? I'm already in therapy. Agent Foster recommended a specialist in psychological manipulation recovery. I'm learning to recognize the patterns of thinking that made me susceptible to Jessica's control. And you're committed to being honest with me about everything, even things that make you look bad. Especially things that make me look bad. Secrets and lies are what allowed Jessica to destroy our family. Complete honesty is the only way we can protect ourselves from future manipulation. 3 weeks later, Jessica Morrison was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Vincent Romano and 4 associates were sentenced to federal racketeering charges, carrying 20 to 25-year sentences. Gavin was awarded full custody of his daughter, who was born healthy, despite the stress of Jessica's criminal activities. He named her Helen after our grandmother as a tribute to the family member who had tried to protect us from manipulation and fraud. Our parents completed their community service requirements and began family therapy sessions designed to address the resentments and vulnerabilities that Jessica had exploited. As for me, I finally felt safe returning to my house on Maple Street, protected by the knowledge that Jessica and her criminal associates would never again be able to threaten my family or my property. The house felt different now, not because of any physical changes, but because it was no longer just my refuge from the world. It had become the foundation for rebuilding genuine family relationships based on honesty, respect, and mutual support, rather than manipulation and exploitation. 6 months after Jessica's sentencing, I stood in my grandmother Helen's kitchen preparing Sunday dinner for my slowly healing family. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows I had cleaned that morning, illuminating the dining table where 4 generations of my family had shared meals, arguments, celebrations, and now the careful work of rebuilding trust. My house had been transformed from a symbol of division into a gathering place for genuine reconciliation. Patricia and Harold arrived promptly at 3 p.m., carrying a casserole dish and wearing the subdued expressions of people still learning to navigate relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation. "Elisa, dear," Patricia said, setting her contribution on the counter, "thank you again for inviting us. I know these dinners aren't easy for any of us." "They're necessary," I replied, stirring the sauce for the pasta. "Family healing doesn't happen through avoidance." Gavin arrived 20 minutes later with 8-month-old Helen strapped to his chest in a baby carrier. Fatherhood had transformed him in ways that went far beyond the obvious physical changes. His shoulders were broader, his posture more confident, and his eyes held a clarity that had been missing for years. "How's my favorite niece?" I asked, gently stroking Helen's soft cheek. "She's been asking about her Aunt Elisa all week," Gavin said with a grin. "Well, not in words yet, but I can tell." Baby Helen gurgled happily, reaching for my hair with tiny fingers that seemed to find everything fascinating. Watching my brother interact with his daughter, I could see how completely he had embraced the responsibility of breaking the cycle of manipulation and dysfunction that had characterized our family for so long. "Any word from Jessica's lawyer about the custody appeal?" Harold asked as we settled around the dining table. "The appeal was denied," Gavin replied matter-of-factly. "Jessica's conviction for defrauding multiple families made the custody decision straightforward. Helen will grow up without ever being subjected to her mother's manipulation." "I'm sorry that Helen will grow up without knowing her mother," Patricia said quietly. "No matter what Jessica did, every child deserves to know both parents." "No," Gavin said firmly. "Every child deserves to know loving, honest parents. Jessica is a professional manipulator who destroyed multiple families for financial gain. Helen deserves protection from that kind of toxicity, even if it means growing up with difficult questions about her mother." The conversation might have been uncomfortable 6 months ago, but our family therapy sessions had taught us to address difficult topics directly rather than avoiding them through politeness. Speaking of therapy, I said, "Dr. Martinez wants to see all of us together next week to discuss our progress with trust rebuilding exercises." Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Those exercises are challenging. Yesterday, she had your mother and me write letters acknowledging every boundary we violated during the Jessica situation." "How many boundaries did you identify?" I asked. Patricia consulted a small notebook she had been carrying to therapy sessions. 17 major violations, including financial surveillance, property invasion, emotional manipulation, and conspiracy to commit theft. 17 major violations in less than 6 months, I repeated. That's a significant pattern of behavior. It is, and acknowledging that pattern is helping us understand how easily we were manipulated by Jessica. She didn't create our willingness to violate your autonomy. She just gave us permission to act on existing resentments. Harold nodded. Dr. Martinez helped us see that Jessica was successful because we already believed you were selfish and needed to be taught lessons about family obligation. She just provided the framework for acting on those beliefs. And how do you feel about those beliefs now? Patricia set down her fork and looked directly at me. I feel ashamed that I ever thought your success and independence were character flaws rather than admirable achievements. I feel horrified that I was willing to steal your security to prove a point about family loyalty. More than that, Harold added, I feel grateful that you've given us the opportunity to rebuild our relationship based on respect for who you actually are, rather than resentment about who we thought you should be. Baby Helen chose that moment to reach across the table toward the centerpiece, babbling happily and completely oblivious to the serious conversation happening around her. Her innocent joy provided a perfect reminder of why this difficult work was worthwhile. Uncle Tom stopped by yesterday. I mentioned referring to my neighbor who had provided crucial testimony during the investigation. He wanted you both to know that the entire neighborhood supports your efforts to make amends for what happened. The neighborhood knows about our therapy, Patricia asked with concern. The neighborhood knows that you're taking responsibility for your actions and working to repair the damage you caused. They also know that Jessica manipulated our entire family, not just you. What do they think about the manipulation? They think Jessica was one of the most dangerous people they've ever encountered. Mrs. Fitzgerald told me yesterday that Jessica reminds her of con artists she used to read about in crime novels, except Jessica was targeting families instead of individual victims. Gavin adjusted Helen's position in his arms. Have you heard anything about Jessica's other victims? Agent Foster called last week with an update. They've identified 16 families across 8 states that Jessica defrauded using similar tactics. The total financial damage is estimated at over $2 million. $2 million. Harold whistled low. We had no idea we were involved with someone operating at that level. Jessica was running a criminal enterprise disguised as family drama. She specialized in identifying families with property assets and elderly relatives, then engineering romantic relationships or friendships that would give her access to financial information. How many other families had their relationships destroyed like ours? Agent Foster said at least 6 families have reported permanent estrangement between family members as a result of Jessica's manipulation. Some of those families may never recover from the damage she caused. Patricia wiped her eyes with her napkin. Knowing that we contributed to Jessica's ability to hurt other families makes our responsibility even heavier. But knowing that you've helped expose her operation and prevent future victims makes your cooperation meaningful, I pointed out. Your testimony was crucial for securing her conviction. It's not enough to balance what we did, but it's a start, Harold acknowledged. After dinner, we moved to the living room where I had arranged photo albums spanning 3 generations of family history. This had become part of our Sunday routine, looking through old pictures and sharing memories that predated the manipulation and conflict. Look at this, Gavin said, pointing to a photograph of our family at Christmas when we were children. We look genuinely happy. We were genuinely happy, Patricia replied, before life became so complicated. Life didn't become complicated, I corrected gently. We became dishonest with each other. We started keeping secrets, harboring resentments, and avoiding difficult conversations until those problems festered into major conflicts. And that made us perfect targets for Jessica's manipulation, Harold observed. She exploited existing family dysfunction rather than creating new problems. Baby Helen had fallen asleep in Gavin's arms, her tiny fist curled around his finger. Watching him gaze down at his daughter with complete devotion, I could see his determination to provide her with the kind of family stability that none of us had experienced. "What kind of family do we want to be for Helen?" I asked. "Honest," Gavin said immediately, even when honesty is uncomfortable or inconvenient. "Supportive without being controlling," Patricia added. "We want to help each other without trying to manage each other's choices." "Respectful of boundaries," Harold contributed. "We want to be close without being invasive." "And vigilant against manipulation," I concluded. "We want to protect each other from people who would try to exploit our love for personal gain." As my parents prepared to leave that evening, Patricia turned to me with an expression of maternal concern that felt genuine rather than manipulative. "Elisa, are you happy? Really and truly happy? Not just relieved that the crisis is over, but actually content with your life?" I considered her question carefully. 6 months ago, I would have deflected or given a superficial answer. Now, our commitment to honesty required a more thoughtful response. "I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because my circumstances are perfect, but because I'm finally part of a family that values truth over manipulation, respect over control, and genuine love over obligation." Even after everything we put you through, especially after everything we put each other through, we survived Jessica's attempt to destroy us, and we chose to rebuild rather than abandon each other. That's a kind of strength I didn't know our family possessed. Harold embraced me awkwardly, still learning how to express affection without ulterior motives. "We love you, Elisa, not because we want something from you, but because of who you are." After they left, Gavin and I sat on my front porch watching the sunset while Helen slept peacefully in her stroller. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of children playing in nearby yards and the distant hum of evening traffic. "Do you think we'll ever completely trust each other again?" Gavin asked. "I think we'll build a different kind of trust than we had before. A trust based on consistent actions rather than family obligations. A trust that acknowledges our capacity for mistakes while believing in our commitment to growth." That sounds more honest than the trust we had before Jessica. Much more honest and much stronger. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I realized that my house on Maple Street had become something I never expected, not just a home for myself, but a foundation for genuine family healing. Jessica had tried to steal my house to solve her gambling debts, but in the end, she had given my family something far more valuable, the opportunity to rebuild our relationships based on truth, respect, and genuine love, rather than manipulation and control. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor Fitzgerald. "Saw your family leaving. Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become and the family you're rebuilding." I smiled as I typed my response. Grandma Helen's memory is what gave me the strength to fight for what was right. I hope she knows her legacy lives on in Helen's granddaughter. The evening air was warm and peaceful as I watched Gavin gently lift his sleeping daughter from her stroller. This was the family I had always wanted, honest, supportive, and built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Jessica Morrison had tried to destroy us, but instead she had given us the gift of discovering who we could be when we chose love over manipulation, truth over convenience, and growth over comfortable dysfunction. That was a gift worth more than any house, more than any amount of money, and more valuable than any inheritance. It was the gift of genuine family. Have you ever had someone close to you try to manipulate or take advantage of your trust? How did you handle the situation, and what did it teach you about setting boundaries with family members? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family drama, personal growth, and finding strength in difficult situations. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of protecting yourself from manipulation, even from people you love. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to enable their destructive behavior. Stay strong, stay honest, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is selfish. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.